Welcome everyone to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast. I'm a networking expert and the author of the upcoming book, No Strangers, How to Build Community, One Relationship at a Time. My why is the pursuit of mastery, and the goal of this podcast is to lock arms on a lifelong mission of daily personal growth to become the best version of ourselves. So let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special musician. He's achieved a level of mastery as the drummer for one of Canada's most beloved bands. This is the multi-platinum, multi-million selling, 12-time Juno award-winning band, Blue Rodeo. So welcome to the podcast, Glenn Milchem. Glenn, how are you? And how good did it feel to be back in my hometown of Ottawa last month to play the Canadian Tire Centre?
Well, I'm well. Thank you, Joel, for asking. And it felt great. All the shows we've done so far this year have been amazing. You know, I'd say that show was part of the first run of shows that was more than just a few shows in a row that we've done in 5 years, because prior to the pandemic, after our last tour, which I think was 2017, our last full across Canada tour, Greg Keeler, one of our singers, kind of hit a wall in terms of his health, and he was like, I can't do this anymore. He's been diabetic for since like 90. I think he was diagnosed as being diabetic in 95. So, he's been dealing with that for a long time. He also has some hearing issues, severe tinnitus and stuff. And so at the end of our last sort of cross Canada tour, 2017, he hit a wall. He was like, I can't do this anymore. So we were just doing one-offs, and, we would not do more than a couple of shows in a row. But during the pandemic, he was starting to feel better, and I think some of his reasons for not wanting to tour anymore was also just kind of frustration with the band, which can kind of happen after a band's been kicking around for about 35 years. And but after taking a period of sort of slowing down and not working as intensively, he felt ready to get back into it. So this year was the first time we were actually out on the road for more than a week at a time. And it was amazing because we all missed it, and the shows were great. Playing the Canadian Tire Centre in Ottawa is always a blast. It's a fantastic, it's a great venue because it's an arena that actually sounds good, and so arenas are fun. Like, they're always fun, but some of them are like, this is fun, but it sounds awful. Some of them are just like giant toilets, cement toilets with tin roofs. But that arena actually sounds really good, and the Ottawa crowd is always great. So it was a blast.
Yeah, arenas aren't always conducive to good acoustics, so it's always nice when they do sound good. How amazing is it that during the pandemic, musicians aren't sure if you're ever even going to play live again, and you guys are still playing arenas? Like, what does it mean to you that not only are people showing up, but enough to play arenas, which is amazing?
Well, I feel a lot of gratitude now for how the band has endured and that we still have an audience. I think there was a time, I would say probably about 50, maybe like 20 years ago, when we were touring a lot. And I remember Basil and I, the bass player, we used to bitch a lot. We'd be like, which is kind of like bands do that, especially after you've been together for a long time. You have an ally in the band and you just sit together and kvetch about things. You're just like complaining about this, that, and the other. And like, the other band members, like, why is this like this? And I look back on that and I think, like, what was I thinking? Like, why did we spend so much time complaining? We were I don't think you saw that, how fortunate we were to be doing what we're doing. And then to have the experience, and then, basically after a while, when you sort of start going, oh my God, we're still here, we're still doing this. And you start to feel more like, okay, I'm actually really lucky. This is still happening, and that people are still coming and still want to see the band, and that the band is surviving at all, because we have had our ups and downs, and there's a reason bands don't last as long as ours have. It's because it's really hard. Like, it's really hard to keep a band together that long. It's hard to stay creatively vital. It's hard to get along that long. It's hard to want to stay in the business or to stay healthy enough. Because it's a job where you can drink, you can do stuff, you can do stuff that's necessarily not good.
A lot of times it's encouraged, actually.
Well, yeah, it's especially earlier on, there may be this kind of romantic idea, like, yeah, man, have a few drinks, get on stage, loosen up a little. But inevitably what happens is like I mean, how many people in the band are ex-drinkers now? Like, I think, let's see, 1, 2 I think we're just at 3. Maybe I don't know, but I know so many musicians who at a certain point went, yeah, I had to stop, because you get to a point where it's either you stop or you're not going to be able to continue. You're not going to be functional. So there's all that sort of thing that you have to get past, and if you still have an audience, you're incredibly lucky. So I don't play a show now without going, I'm so grateful. Like, I don't go on stage at the end and not look out at the audience and go, I'm so happy this is still happening. I'm so grateful. And it felt amazing to do that after the pandemic, because there was a certain, I didn't feel like we'll never play live again, but there was, we had the rug pulled out from under us many times. We thought, we're going to be back. And then it was like, no, that's got to be postponed. Oh, there's another wave. Oh, there's another lockdown. And so all that was, discouraging, obviously, so it felt amazing to be actually past it, even though it was touch and go. We had a couple of crew members that got sick. A few of us got sick. We did an Eastern leg where we did a few shows on the East Coast. And then on the way home, I was like, I don't feel good. I think I partied too much last night or something, and then I got home and did a test and realized I was sick, and then 2 other band members got sick, and luckily we had a week off. We actually did have to postpone one show we were supposed to do in Peterborough, but we were supposed to do Massey Hall the next week, so we basically, the 3 of us had like 1 week to sort of get well enough to do Massey Hall, which we managed to do. But it was, even then it was touch and go, but it was amazing to be back, and playing Massey in particular, that was their first time in 5 years, and that was amazing to be back and do that.
Yeah, the more I talk to musicians, the more the main thing that comes up is just gratitude. People are grateful to be back, and that there's still an audience and people are still passionate about music. You mentioned how hard it is to have longevity over a career. It's like a marriage, but with a marriage, there's just 2 people that have to get along. In your case, there's 7 people over 3-4 decades that have to get along. So
yeah, there's 7 people, but people do come and go too. So that's the thing. With bands, you can divorce some of them. But yeah, like, for instance, for Blue Rodeo to sustain, like, Jim and Greg have to stay together. They're, if anybody's relationship is a bit like a marriage, it's theirs. Which I remember thinking that when I first joined the band. It's like, they're like an old married couple. And which they are and they aren't. But the band is based around their relationship and their songwriting and singing together, and the fact that they've managed to endure, like, they've been friends. They started hanging out when they were 14, 15 or something like that, and they're 66 and 67 now. So I don't know, somebody do the math quickly. It's been a long time, and but yeah, they've managed to endure.
So I'm all about networking and building community. So I like to share for our audience. I always like to share how I ended up here today with my guests. So I had our mutual friend Alf Annabellini on the podcast recently. He's an amazing producer, recording engineer, and he's now a part of the supergroup Envy of None with Alex Lifeson from Rush. And I wanted to kick this podcast off in style. So I reached out to Alf and I got some kind words sent from him. So he says, I've worked with him 3 times in total. Once when I was an assistant on a Betty Moon session when he was drumming and producing. I think it was my first or second session ever.
That was in Wellesley. That was a long time ago.
Once with Blue Rodeo for a song on the Leonard Peltier album to raise awareness for a cause. And finally with Hayden. He is incredibly musical, writes songs, plays guitar, sings, and he is the type of drummer that has a knack for playing exactly what is needed. I don't know him as well as my partner in Envy of None, Andy Curran, but I had a great time every time we were in the studio. So that's from Alf.
Oh, that's really nice. And yeah, I mean, Alf is, yeah, like I say, we worked together 3 times, and that's the Betty Moon session he was talking about was, yeah, actually that was my one. I've since done one other production, and I don't know if you don't count my own records. That was the one time I produced a session, and but it never got released, unfortunately. But yeah, that was at Wellesley Sound, and I remember watching some of that podcast you did with him, and him talking about how he got his start at Wellesley in Toronto. That's really nice of him. Yeah, and I guess the other things I did with him were at Orange, I believe, and with when Rodeo did some songs for the Leonard Peltier benefit record that Greg started, and then the Hayden track, that was just a song I got hired to play drums on, Trees Lounge by Hayden. And yeah, I remember him talking about that, saying, "Oh, we did it so fast." But I actually really like that record. I think it sounds great, and I think they did a great job on it. Yeah, and anyway, that's really nice of him. And Andy Curran, also the bass player in Envy of None. He's someone I played with back in the late '80s, early '90s. He had a band. He used to be in Coney Hatch, who were like a '70s hard rock band. Who had a gold record and did really well. They had a few hit songs like Monkey Bars and stuff, which I think Andy wrote. And I met Andy when I was working on a solo album by this guy Milchem in the late '80s. Milchem used to have a band called Boys Brigade, and then he released a solo album. Then after he didn't really pursue his solo career, he then moved to New Orleans and started recording under Daniel Lanois' wing. And he ended up producing records by the Neville Brothers, and he actually produced Blue Rodeo's second album, Diamond Mine. But after I worked with Andy on that Milchem record, he got me to come out and audition to record his first solo album, which was called Andy Curran and Soho 69. I can't remember. I think the record might have been called No Tattoos. I can't remember. So, and that was interesting because that was kind of a hair metal band, which was not my thing. Like sort of in the vein of Aerosmith. I mean, I liked that stuff, but it was kind of not where I came from. I came from a kind of a post-punk background when I first came to Toronto. That was sort of my thing, and those were kind of the bands that I played in. But I knew that I wanted to make a living as a drummer. I sort of realized early on that if I tried to sort of, have a straight job and be a musician, that I was just going to sink into a massive depression. I just knew I had to play music, and that I was willing to do whatever it took to become a professional musician, including living a life of relative poverty. That was okay. I'd rather be poor and do what I love doing than do something that doesn't make me happy. And I sort of realized that early on, that mentally I had to make that choice. So even though, so at first I was like, I'm just going to play in cool post-punk bands and stuff. But then very quickly I realized I'm not going to make a living doing that. So I'm going to play with everybody, anybody who will have me, any style of music. And so then I started branching out. And so I ended up playing with Andy for a couple of years, and that was fun. And he actually, I'm still buds with Andy. He's a great guy, and he's managed to sustain a career in the business end of things. So I'm really happy to see him doing well in Envy of None, because he's a really talented musician, songwriter, and he's someone who's hung in for decades, and he deserves that success. So I'm happy for him. And
So,
Elf too.
so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't also get a quote from Andy Curran. So this is what
Oh, there you
Andy
go.
Curran has to say. He says, well, Glenn once told me he loved playing live with me because he could hit as hard as he wanted, and I never once complained. And he put a smiley face emoji in there. He said, we're talking about maybe recording and doing a few shows for the anniversary of the No Tattoos record, which is what you said.
Right.
Give him my love. So that's from Andy Curran.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, he's a great guy. And he's he got me a gig many years after I played with him. Because he was connected or worked for Anthem Records. I can't even remember. I think it's as a management. He was in a management company that was also working with Big Rec and Ian Thornley. And Ian Thornley wanted to do an acoustic record, which he released as Ian Fletcher Thornley. And Andy recommended me as a drummer for that. So I played, and that was about 6 years ago. I think the record's called Secrets, Ian Fletcher Thornley Secrets. And so I recorded that with him and did a Canadian tour with him. And I owe Andy for that. So
you're clearly passionate about music. Where does this love of music come from? Is there an earliest musical memory, a time maybe where music meant something special to you for the first time?
Well, I grew up in a house where music was always important, though neither of my parents played instruments, but my father's main hobby was listening to music. He's a jazz enthusiast and has been his whole life. And though my father never picked up an instrument, he's a deep listener and still is. And listened to music all the time and loved jazz and blues. So I grew up in a house where music was really important, and we would go to shows in Ontario Place back when you could get in shows for free at Ontario Place or for the price of admission to the park. And, he would take us to go see Count Basie, and I remember seeing Buddy Rich there, Oscar Peterson, Cleo Lane. We'd go see a lot of, my mom liked Chuck Mangione. Went to see Chuck Mangione. But music was just always important. And at some point at the age of 8, and I think this is, I've often wondered, why did I get obsessed with drums? I don't know why, but around the age of 8, I got really obsessed with drums. And I think it was because my next door neighbor was this guy named Carl Hughes. And Carl was a teenager. He would sometimes babysit my brother and I. I have a twin brother, by the way, named John. We're identical twins, who also plays music, though not professionally. And, but he had an incredible Ludwig drum set with 2 double bass drums and tons of toms and stuff like that. So he was a super cool dude. And I think it was maybe him that made me interested in drums. At the age of 8, I became obsessed with drums. And I remember my dad took me to Long and McQuaid, where I got I remember having the Ludwig drum catalog from whatever year that was, probably 1971 or 72 or something, and just obsessively looking at all the drum sets and dreaming about owning a drum set and begging my parents to get me a drum set. And they bought me a set of bongos for Christmas when I was 8. And I played the shit out of those bongos. I played the bongos in the school band. I was super into the bongos, And
Were you happy to receive the bongos, or were you
I was happy to receive
disappointed
the
that it
bongos.
wasn't a drum kit?
Yeah, I think I was a little it's not a drum set, but the bongos that would do, And my parents were like, let's see if he likes these before we spend hundreds of dollars on a drum kit, which I think was a wise decision. But I did, I passionately played the bongos for a couple of years until I was 10, and then they bought me my first drum kit. And then I was just obsessed with playing drums after that, And I at the age of 10, I just decided I'm going to practice for at least an hour every day, and I did. Though I didn't take lessons at first. I didn't start taking lessons till I was 12, because I had this idea that I was just going to figure it out myself, and I was going to find my own voice, and I didn't really think I needed lessons. And I think my parents were like, you should probably have lessons, And And I'm glad they did, because it radically improved what I could do. You know, it hugely broadened my playing. And I remember I had to work at my dad's shop. My dad worked at Standard Autoglass in Hamilton, and where he was the manager there, and I had to go clean the shop or something and stick rear view mirrors on people's cars and stuff like that every couple of weeks to pay for my lessons. But that was a good thing to do, and that's basically how I started playing drums.
And how early on did you know you had something special to offer as a drummer, and that maybe this is something you'd like to pursue as a career?
I think I felt right away that this was something I could do, and I think I knew I wanted to do it for a living, probably from the age of 8. This was where I wanted to go in my life. As far as having something special, I just thought I can do this, and I can be good at this, and I know I can do this. I feel naturally inclined to this. And really with very little evidence, like very little. It's not like I sat down and played amazing stuff. I remember the first rhythm I remember being able to go do that, like make a gallop rhythm. That's pretty good. That's good enough. So it didn't really take much for me to have confidence in what I was doing. And I think actually and there were a lot of times when that confidence was shaken, and there were a lot of times when I thought maybe this belief I have in myself is not justified, but I do think that having that sometimes unjustified confidence or belief in yourself is kind of the key ingredient to becoming a professional musician, or maybe a professional anything. And so I think I kind of had it from the get-go, even though I arguably shouldn't have. Like if somebody might look at that and go like, okay, kid, look, but be realistic. Like find some other interests where, you can, might be able to make a living someday, because, being a musician is a very pie in the sky idea. But I never had any of that. I was just like, I'm going to do this. And so I sort of think it was there from the beginning.
Yeah. If you don't believe in yourself, who's going to believe in you, right? You gotta have that self-belief to push forward. If you and I were friends when you were 16 and you invited me over to your house to listen to some music, what records would you be spinning for me?
Well, at that point, at the time I was 16, I was fully immersed in punk and new wave, and what we now call post-punk, but was not called post-punk at the time. It was just kind of punk and new wave. And when I was 14 or 15, is when I sort of discovered that. I remember when it first came along, I was super, before I got into punk and new wave, I was actually really into jazz and progressive rock. Actually, my very first musical love was Alice Cooper, which I discovered when I was 9, and I heard School's Out on the radio. And that blew my mind. And I remember I was with my cousins who were visiting from England, who were about 20 years old at the time. And I was like, who was that? Like, what is that music? I just thought that song was so incredible, School's Out. And they said, it's Alice Cooper. And I said, who's she? And they laughed, because, the idea of a man with a woman's name at the age of 9 had not entered my head. And, but from there, so I was obsessed with Alice Cooper from the age of 9 to 11. And then I met this kid named Alan Okada, who was another drummer in the school I went to, who was actually, I was talking about having your confidence shaken. Alan was a far better drummer than I was. Alan could play along with Emerson, Lake and Palmer records when he was 11. So he could play extremely complex music note for note at the age of 11. And I was like, oh my God, I've got some practicing to do. And but we ended up being buds, and he introduced me to a lot of progressive rock music, like Yes and Genesis and ELP. So then I was obsessed with that from the age of 11 to 14, and also obsessed with jazz at that age from my dad. And so I was really into sort of technical music, and when I started taking lessons, so I started studying jazz while I was taking lessons. And then some friends and I, a different group of friends that I hung out with in high school, discovered first of all, I think we discovered Elvis Costello, and then we went from there to the Sex Pistols, to the Clash, to the Buzzcocks, and Magazine, Public Image Limited. So during my teen years, when I was 16, that's what you would have heard. If you came to my house, I would have played you Gang of Four. I would have played you Magazine. I would have played you Public Image Limited. We would listen to the Clash. I was super into the Clash. Buzzcocks were probably my favorite band at the time. And so I was obsessed with the British new wave and punk at the age of 16.
Alice Cooper, the godfather of shock rock. And
yeah.
What's crazy is you see the image he has, and a lot of people don't know that he's an incredible songwriter. I believe he's written hits for like Celine Dion. He's got some songwriting credits you would never expect for Alice Cooper with his image.
His songs were incredible. His songs were great, and those records. I personally, for me, the early Alice Cooper records, like Love It to Death, Killer, and those records hold up. They're still amazing, and I love that stuff. I still love that stuff.
So your friend, you make a friend who's an amazing drummer. Was that something that inspired you to be better, or did it kind of deflate you that there are levels to this game?
I think it did both. It did inspire me to be better. And we would do things like double drum solos together. And I think that was the part that was deflating, is that I remember, one girl saying to me, "Alan was better than you."
How dare she?
And I was kind of like, oh, that hurts my feelings. But what the irony there is that I started taking lessons, and then years later, when Alan heard me play, after I took lessons, he felt discouraged and switched to guitar, which I think is really sad, because I think I know Alan subsequently went on to become the guitar player in King Cobb Steely, who were a notable 90s Toronto band who did pretty, they were an indie band, but they did well and toured Canada and stuff. And they were quite an influential band. So, he did, though he didn't pursue a career in music, he stayed in music and kept playing, and I believe he still plays drums. I haven't played drums in years, but I'd say that it was deflating, but because I knew that I wasn't going to stop playing drums, I just persisted, and which I think is the most important thing. It's like you're always, because the thing is, there's always going to be people better than you, always, and but there's never going to be anybody who's more you than you. There's never going to be anybody who's better at being you than you. There's always going to be people who can play circles around you one way or another. There's going to be, but I'm the best Glenn Milchem in the world. But there's hundreds of drummers in Toronto that can probably play circles around me, technically in some ways, but they're not me. They don't do my thing, and I think that's what I came to realize. The beautiful thing about music, you can be competitive in music, but ultimately it's not a competition. It's not about competing. It's about finding your place. It's about finding out how you are, who you are, and being that artist as to the nth degree, and being the best that you can be. So constantly trying to improve, constantly learning, constantly practicing. Which and trying to get better, but not worrying about that person can do this better than I can, or that person's got a better gig than me. It's like, what I've also learned, there's room for everybody. If you're good at what you do, there's room for you. You will find a place. You don't have to worry, about this other person in town who seems to be getting all the gigs. It's fine. They're going to get their gigs. You're going to get your gigs. There's room for everybody. And you can all learn from each other and support each other.
You gave yourself a few moments for a pity party, but then you pulled yourself up and you allowed that to inspire you to become a better drummer. You didn't play in bands until you were about 18, 19, but then you made up for lost time by playing in dozens, 10 different bands in Toronto, a bunch of recordings. What does your journey look like from those early bands leading up to maybe the audition for Blue Rodeo? And then we'll pick up from there.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Oakville. So I didn't, in Oakville, there was no music scene, and there were like two bands, maybe, one of which I did join. And so, but in high school, I wasn't really in any bands. I didn't know too many musicians. There was a couple of people I jammed with. And I knew I wanted to be in a band, but I was living in Oakville and I finished high school, and I decided I didn't want to pursue a post-secondary education. I wanted to try and start a career in music, but had no idea how to do it. So I remember getting a sort of, I had a couple of sort of straight jobs that I deliberately chose jobs that were kind of mindless so that I could focus on my other interests. And one of which was being a security guard at the Xerox Research Center in Oakville, being a nighttime security guard. And that was the job that made me realize that I just need to pursue music, because I got horribly depressed doing that job, which you would, you're up all night and sleeping all day. You kind of don't have a social life. And I just sort of realized, what am I doing? Like I need to play music. But I didn't know any musicians in Oakville. I think at that point, I had played in a cover band in Oakville called Boing Boing Boing, which was a fun band, and we just played around the Oakville, Burlington, Hamilton area. We played covers, and so that was the first sort of real band I was in. But it was not what I was looking to do. So I took an ad out in Now magazine, and at the time, like I say, I wasn't seeing myself as like a session drummer or drummer for hire. I was like going to start a band. The band was going to become hugely popular, and I was going to, make a living like that, So I put an ad in Now magazine looking to start a band, like drummer looking to start a band. And instead, I got a reply from this band called 04, who were a punk band in Toronto that was comprised of former members of The Ugly, who were a very important, influential punk band in Toronto in the late 70s, which I didn't know at the time. And so this is, I'm going to say 1982, 83. So to me, they were already like wildly out of date. Like these, like it was like, okay, guys, you're into the 1977 thing. It's 1982. But whatever, you want to play, and it's a gig, and so I'm gonna go play with you. So I would take the train into Toronto and rehearse with them, and they also had members of a band called Dick Duck and the Dorks, who were another, Toronto band that played around a lot.
These are all amazing band names. Was the game like leveled up back then, and
Yeah, well, those in those days too. You have to realize there was on Queen Street, or on that scene, the Toronto independent scene, it was truly independent. There was not a prayer of a major label coming in and checking your band out and being interested. You were doing it strictly to be part of a scene. You were doing it strictly to be creative and to be out there. And So I played in this punk band, and most of these people were a lot older than me. I was 18, I think 18, 19 when I started playing with them. The bass player was 36. I could not believe how old he was, like 36. Like that was older than some of my teachers, and I couldn't believe he was 36, and like he smoked weed, and he was like, he was kind of a cool guy. And it was just like, how can you be 36 and be like this? I hadn't met anybody like this in my life before, And they were all cool people. They were kind of, slightly degenerate, which was also new for me. But from that band, I did a few shows with that band. I didn't do a lot of shows with them, but I remember a friend of mine came out and brought a girlfriend of his, and who was dating the manager of this band called Vital Signs. And Vital Signs were kind of a cool band on Queen Street at the time, and they were a post-punk band. They were into the stuff that I was into at the time. They were influenced by Gang of Four and Simple Minds and Joy Division and bands like that, sort of British post-punk bands that I was into at the time. And I think the girlfriend said to the manager, like, oh, I saw this really good drummer playing with this punk band. And Vital Signs were looking for a drummer because their drummer was a member of Rent Boys. and they were called Rent Boys Inc. And Rent Boys were the coolest band on Queen Street at the time, and they were going to England to make it big in England, and they were, which they didn't. They actually got on the cover of NME. So they, like, the thing about Rent Boys is that they were super charismatic, and they had a wonderful mystique. They just didn't really have very good songs, and they couldn't really play their instruments very well. But that was secondary to being just. They were so cool. They really, like, when you saw them, you're like, wow, you guys are cool. Like, you just knew they lived lives of squalor in warehouses where they, there were women throwing themselves at them, and they were doing drugs all the time, and it was very romantic at the time, like, but so their drummer was going off to England to pursue stardom. That didn't happen, and they needed a new drummer. So I played with them and joined the band, and that was how I entered the Queen Street scene proper in Toronto at the time. And once I joined that band, we started playing, and we started writing more songs, and we recorded an EP, which was the first record I ever played on. It was an EP record called Collage, the Collage EP, and it had a single on it a song on it that we made a video for, called Collage. Now, so this is 1984. Nobody had records out. Like, nobody made videos yet on Queen Street. That was, and obviously it was self-financed, and it was the two main guys in the band, Rick the singer and Terry the bass player, who made all this stuff happen. Who had this ambition, and the video and single did really well on Much Music. It got played a lot. And it was actually the video is still on YouTube now. If you look it up, Collage by Vital Signs, and that's SINES, not SIGNS. But it was a big deal at the time. It was, and it's still a good video, actually. But that kind of, from that band, I ended up joining a ton of other bands. I joined a band called the Garbage Men, who had a residency at the Cameron House in Toronto, and also this place called the Quocté. We played every Wednesday for about 4 years, from 84 to 88. And that was that band was a very formative part of my development, because that was a band that never rehearsed and never had any rules. So, and it was just a three-piece. It was initially, it was me, a bass player, and a sax player who also sang. So there was a lot of space in that music, and nobody ever said, don't do this, don't play like this, don't play like that. So I could just go nuts in that band. And there was a lot of improvisation, and it really allowed my playing to develop and go off in different directions, because I had total freedom. And then I joined another band called White Noise, which was a kind of jazz funk band that was heavily influenced by Ornette Coleman. Ornette Coleman is like a very important jazz pioneer. In the late 50s, he kind of pioneered free jazz, and then in the 70s, he had a band called Primetime, who were kind of funk based, but still held his principles. He had a concept called harmolodics, which was basically, not necessarily having a specific tonal center in your improvisation, and for lack of a better description. But that was a very adventurous jazz band, jazz funk band. So I played with them, and that band did really well. Like, we could pack the bamboo, and it was interesting, because that was a period of time where you could play a song that was in 7/4 or 9/4. In odd time signatures, and the dance floor would be packed. There'd be 500 people in the club, and everybody would be dancing. Like, it was kind of an extraordinary time in Toronto that way. That people were really into live music and really into dancing. So I joined White Noise, and they did well. And then I joined this other band, Groovy Religion, which were a bit more of like a punk rock, hard rock kind of band. I played with them for probably the next 20, 25 years on and off. And I just started playing in a bunch of bands. And by doing that, I made enough money to scrape by, to basically eke out a living, And but another thing that happened to me was that I became a father really young, at the age of 22, and that also made me. I think that was the point where I went, okay, I have to, if I'm going to be able to support a family, then I really have to, sort of branch out and, say yes to everything and be willing to play all styles of music. And so I started to do that, and I did jingles, when I could, and I started playing. I started playing in roots bands and things like that, because that started actually because of the success of Blue Rodeo. When Blue Rodeo started to become huge around 1986, suddenly roots bands came up everywhere in Toronto. And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh man, these guys are like ruining the music scene, because I was like all into, all this music was like, there's all this dark, like sort of experimental, gothy type music going on that I was pretty into. And then suddenly everybody started wearing plaid shirts and playing acoustic guitars and sounding like the band, and I was like, what the hell's going on here? But being a professional, you can't just sort of go, well, I'm not doing that. And I was like, okay, I got to adapt, so I did. And, I had to started listening to the band and basically, learning, understanding, country influenced rock music. And from there, I ended up playing with Andrew Cash. And Andrew Cash was an artist who he first came out in a Clash influenced punk band called L'Étranger, which he was in with this guy Charlie Angus, Charlie is now an MPP, member of the NDP, and he's been a member of Parliament in Northern Ontario for a long time now. I think at least 15 years. And Charlie's an amazing guy. And Andrew actually also ended up becoming a member of Parliament for the NDP later in life. But he went from L'Étranger to starting a solo career, and that was kind of roots based. And he got signed to Island Records, and he released his first record called Time and Place, and then he was looking for a new drummer, and I auditioned and joined that band, and toured with him. I was with him for about 4 years, and I played on a record of his called Boomtown, which we recorded down in North Carolina. And while this was happening, I was still playing in other bands. But once I joined Andrew, that was a pretty full-time concern, at least for the first couple of years. So that became my main focus. And so we recorded Boomtown and toured Canada and the States with him. We opened for Melissa Etheridge in Europe and did an extensive European tour. And this was, while I was a dad of a young son. And while this was happening, Blue Rodeo's first drummer, Blue Rodeo happened, like I say, and sort of changed the landscape of Toronto. And so I was aware of Blue Rodeo, obviously, as everybody was. And I thought they were great. I didn't have any of the records. I didn't really go out and buy other local bands' records. You had local bands' records if they gave you a copy of their record, right? But you didn't go and like, oh, man, I'm going to go and, get my buddy's record, listen to it all the time. Because you already heard them. Like, you open for them and they open for you, but I remember being really impressed with Rodeo's first album. And, but there was also a slight resentment, because which there always is, like when other local bands do really well and you're kind of like, well, what's so great about them, but I remember going to see them before the first album came out. I remember going to see them at the Bamboo, and it was packed, and they had been signed to Warner at that point. And I remember being very impressed they were the most professional sounding band I'd heard from our scene. They were on another level. And so I remember being really impressed by that. But anyway, so, and they carried on, they did their thing. But after their second album, the first drummer, Cleve Anderson, left the band. He just decided, he had a young family. I think he had 2 or 3 kids at the time, and he had a job as a postman, which was, meant, which, when you're a postman, you got a pension, you get paid well, and it was just heartbreaking for him to be on the road all the time and be away from his kids and his wife. So he just decided, I can't do this. And so after Diamond Mine, he left the band, and then he was replaced by a drummer named Mark French, who was who kind of came sort of from the country scene in Toronto, and who played on Casino, which was Rodeo's third album. But during the recording of that record, they did that record with a LA producer named Pete Anderson, who was known for he produced Dwight Yoakam, and he was also a wicked guitar player and played in Dwight Yoakam's band, and he also produced Michelle Shocked. So at the time, this would be like 1988, 89. He was a very reputable producer. And this was, Mark had not spent a lot of time in the studio. And when he went down there, Pete Anderson really kind of undermined his confidence. And I think it had a kind of lasting effect on Mark. And after that, he was kind of having difficulty in the band. He had a lot of tendonitis and things like this, and it just I don't know. That relationship with him and Rodeo just didn't work out, And basically, so after a few years, they decided, like, I think we need to look for another drummer, and they knew about me. They'd known about me for years. They used to come and they go see Vital Signs and the Garbage Man and these other bands. So they knew of me as a drummer, but they never considered me as a possible drummer for Blue Rodeo because the music I was playing was so wildly different from Blue Rodeo. And then Andrew Cash did a gig, I think it was at University of Guelph, opening for Blue Rodeo. And they saw me play that gig, and at the time they went like, oh, he can play roots music. Like, he does do that. And so when they were thinking of looking for another drummer, they gave me a call. They actually gave Andrew a call, and they said, because Andrew wasn't doing so much at this time. And actually, it was while Andrew was kind of on hiatus, because he'd left Island Records and he was looking for a new deal. And so while he was on hiatus, I'd played with Andy Curran and toured with Andy Curran, and then that ended, and I got asked to record this record with a band called Change of Heart. Now, Change of Heart, probably not that well remembered now, except by people who were devoted to them then. But Change of Heart were a very influential and important band at the time in the Canadian independent music scene. They were kind of regarded as the band that were the trailblazers of the independent touring scene in Canada. They were the first band that just was like, okay, nobody knows we exist. Nobody knows who we are. We're gonna get a van across Canada, and we're gonna tour across Canada, and we're gonna play. So they called some club in Vancouver. Hey, we're Change of Heart. We're from Toronto. Can we play a bar? Okay, sure. And so they kind of blazed that trail. And got asked to record a record with them, which was going to be a double album called Smile, which I did, and that went on to be a pretty sort of important record and a well-regarded record in the Canadian independent scene at the time. So I was kind of just signed on to do that when I got a call from Andrew saying, Glenn, I think your ship is coming. And he was like, Jim Cuddy just called me and asked if it was cool if he asked you to audition for Blue Rodeo. And I said, yeah. And Andrew said, yeah, of course it's cool. So Jim called me, and I went and auditioned. And as it turned out, I was one of only, luckily for me, really, I was one of only two people that auditioned. And the other guy that auditioned was a guy named, what is his name? He's a very good drummer, and he was a jazz drummer. And I think I'm going to get his name wrong. So Greg, I think was his first name. I'm not going to venture his whole name because I'm probably going to get it wrong. But he was a very good drummer, and he was a friend of Basil's, and he came out and auditioned. But he was a jazz drummer, and he played like a jazz drummer. And then I went out and played with them, and it worked really well, you know, which is in many ways is surprising. But I was, you know, like I said, I'd learned to be an adaptable drummer. At the same time, I was going through like a real metal phase at the time. I was a huge fan in the late 80s, early 90s. I was a huge fan of like Metallica and Slayer and Megadeth. And even though I wasn't playing in bands like that, I was heavy into that music, and I played double pedals on, you know, on my bass drum and stuff. And so when I started playing with Blue Rodeo, I still had all that, you know, I still had double pedals on my kick, and I was, you know, I was kind of playing way too many notes, really. But they were like, this is our style, you know, you got to strip it down, play more simply, play simple fills, you know, single stroke roll fills and things like that. And so I was like, okay, you know, I'll do that. And so I did. And the audition was really to record Lost Together. And then we'd see to record that album, and then we'd see how it went. So I spent about a month rehearsing with them. And at the same time, I was also rehearsing with Change of Heart to record Smile. And then in January of 92, so that would have been December of 91, I rehearsed with Blue Rodeo and also with Change of Heart. And then January 92, I think it was January 3 and 4, something, 3, 4, 5, I went into the studio, and the Smile record was recorded. And it's, like I said, a double album. I don't know, it's like 20 songs. We recorded the whole thing live off the floor in like 3 days, and which was an incredible experience. And then a few days later, I went into Manta with Blue Rodeo and recorded the drum tracks for Lost Together. And that was interesting too, because at the time, when I joined Blue Rodeo, the band was in a bit of disarray. Which I like at the time, Bobby Wiseman, the original keyboard player, was still in the band, but he was really done with the band, and he had started his own solo career, and he was just fed up with the band. You could just tell. Like, I remember being at rehearsals, and he'd have the newspaper on his keyboard. You know, we'd be talking about the music and stuff, and, you know, trying to talk about a song, and he'd just be flipping through the paper, and then, you know, and then we'd be playing the song, and he would move the paper over and sort of like be glancing at the paper while playing with one hand. And Jim would go like, Bobby, could you just put the paper down? You know, like, he was kind of doing everything he could to show his disinterest, you know. And I remember talking to him about it, going like, you know, you're really not into this. And he's like, yeah, I'm, you know, I really want to leave the band. And he said, like, you know, having you in the band, you know, kind of almost makes me want to stay, but it's just not really enough. I'm just ready to leave. And he did, actually. He left. The last gigs he did a showcase with us at South by Southwest that year in 92. And while he was at South by Southwest, he signed a publishing deal, which gave him an advance. So he just basically gave him a financial cushion, so he felt like he could leave the band, and he did. And so he played the record release party for Lost Together, and I think that was his last gig with the band. And after that, you know, I started gigging with the band, and we didn't have a keyboard player for a while, actually. But we did have a pedal steel player, and that was an interesting period as well, where we were doing songs like Diamond Mine without keyboards, and so Greg would just do a really long guitar solo. And it was a strange period, you know, because obviously we were a keyboard heavy band, especially in the early days. You know, Bobby was kind of like Bobby Wiseman was kind of the ringer in the band. He was the guy that you threw all the solos to, you know. Actually, Jim Cuddy was kind of the lead guitar player as well at that point. And then, but when I joined, Greg kind of took over doing more leads. And then we got James Gray in the band, and James was a friend of mine, and he auditioned. We actually auditioned 12 people before we got James out to audition. And that was because I knew James was an amazing keyboard player, and I knew he could pull off the gig. But and I loved James, but I'd been in bands with James, and James was challenging to be in bands with. You know, he was not an easy guy to be in bands with. But ultimately, I thought, like, okay, we couldn't find the right guy, and so I said, okay, James, come on out. And he came out, and he blew everybody away and got the gig right away. And I remember after they joined him, I said, okay, guys, I gotta warn you, he's difficult. And they were, what are you talking about? He's great. And then he was with us for the next 13 years, and they found out what I meant. But, you know, even though he was difficult, like, the thing about Blue Rodeo is it's a really hard band to get fired from. You actually have to screw up really, really badly to get fired. There's a very high level of dysfunction that is tolerated in that band, which I saw when I joined the band. There was a high level of dysfunction. You know what I mean? Like, even though Bobby Wiseman made it absolutely clear that he did not want to be in that band, nobody thought to say, like, Bobby, why don't you leave? Like, they were just like, okay, he hates us, but he's our guy, so let's go, Bobby. You know, like, there was just always, like, a very high tolerance for kind of craziness, you know, and which I'm going to say now is still present, but to a lesser degree, to a much more tolerable degree. But I imagine that's kind of in every band, you know, musicians. I've since learned it's not just musicians. I think this is probably in every profession, but, you know, there's a certain amount of crazy built into the creative professions, I suppose, and music is no exception. And,
I have a couple quotes sent in from your crazy band members from Blue Rodeo. So,
oh, yeah.
I have some words here from Mike Boguski. Boguski, am I saying that right?
Michael Boguski.
Bogu. So piano and organ for Blue Rodeo. So he says, Glenn is the best drummer in the country, and he pushes me to be a better musician. He has the biggest heart of anyone I know, and he cares deeply about others. He inspires me to be a better person. So that's from Mike. And then, not to be outdone, from Basil Donovan, bass player for Blue Rodeo, he says, as well as being a great friend of mine, Glenn is much more than just one of the greatest drummers around. He is also a great all-around musician and singer-songwriter. He plays guitar well and is all-around musical. It's in his bones. I have been blessed to play with him for over 20 years now.
30 years.
30 years. We got to update
30
that
years
quote.
now.
Yeah.
This is my 30th year with him. That's really sweet. Well, I'm not the best drummer in the country, though. That's a really nice thing to say. That's an entirely subjective thing. But I mean, as I said earlier, there's many drummers who can play circles around me. But I will.
It's nice when your band members think that, though, right?
That's a really nice thing to say. But like I say, I'm the best Glenn Milchem in the world. And yeah, but that's really sweet. And those guys, you know, they're amazing. You know, Basil's an amazing musician and bass player, and really deep. And so is Michael. You know, Michael has a lot of depth to his playing. He's well versed in jazz and classical music, and you know, and he's someone who's also kept working at his instrument. You know, after he joined our band, he took an improvisation course with this teacher at York University, who many musicians I know studied with, named Casey Sokol, including Bobby Wiseman. And Bobby Wiseman was was a student of Casey Sokol's, and Bobby came very much from kind of an avant-garde improvisational background, and I thought it was really cool and smart of Michael to study with him, to bring that element into his playing, because the sort of improvisational element is a really important part of Blue Rodeo's music, and it's one of the things I love about Blue Rodeo, because Blue Rodeo, and it's one of the reasons that I ended up being their drummer, because they could have just got someone who was kind of like, oh, here's a good country rock drummer, but they got someone whose background was not that at all. They got someone, because I also, like I say, I was playing in bands like White Noise, who there was a lot of improvisation in that band. That was kind of a jazz-based band who played odd time signatures. Like, it was important to them to have elements in the band that could draw from places other than just country and rock and roll. And that was always an important part of the band. Like, having Bobby Wiseman in the band, like when you listen to the first Blue Rodeo record, or you listen to Diamond Mine, you listen to the solo on Diamond Mine, or Bobby's solo on, say, Floating on the first Blue Rodeo record, those are not typical keyboard solos. There are sort of avant-garde elements in there. There's elements of improvisation, and that was one of the things that made the band great and made the band interesting and have more to them than just your typical, sort of country rock band. And I think, and it was one of the things that I think people loved about the band and found interesting about the band, and that contributed to their success. And that's always remained an element of the band. Like Bobby Wiseman's replacement, James Gray, also came from a very, very background that was not roots music. He came kind of from the same place I did, this sort of post-punk scene, so that's always been an important part of our music, and there's always been, and like Basil on the other hand, Basil came from like a new wave background. He was in a band called the Sharks before, which was the rhythm section for the Sharks was Basil and the original Rodeo drummer Cleve Anderson, and but before he was in the Sharks, Basil played country music. Basil started playing in country bands in when he was very young, like 18, 19, he's been playing for since 1972, because I remember him saying to me, I've been playing music professionally for 50 years now. So he started playing in country bands in 72. So he had he loved Elvis Costello, and he was deeply into all that kind of music that was also a big influence on Jim and Greg, but he also had very deep country roots, and so all those elements are combined to make Blue Rodeo what it was and still is, and all the people in the band who have been in it since have contributed to that.
So to bring our listeners up to speed on what Blue Rodeo was up to before you joined the band. So they released 3 albums between 87 and 1990. So there was Outskirts, Diamond Mine, and Casino. These albums went 4 times platinum, 3 times platinum, and double platinum. It had some of the classic Blue Rodeo songs like Try, Diamond Mine, Trust Yourself, Till I Am Myself Again.
Yep.
When you're auditioning for the band, there must be excitement, but are you also nervous that you're auditioning for a band that's batting 100%? They're 3 for 3 with multi-platinum albums. Do you have any fear that you might be messing with the magic formula?
No, I didn't feel that way. I thought that I had something to bring to the table that they didn't have before. That was just different, and that I thought it was, I thought I could make it work, and I did. I'd already been in a lot of bands at that point, and I'd already played with a lot of accomplished musicians, so I didn't feel nervous, am I good enough, or I knew that I could, I'd played music that was a lot more challenging and difficult than Rodeo's, though their music was challenging and difficult in ways to me that were different. Like, because in that I had to streamline my playing with them, and I had to learn to be more dynamic with them as well. Because my thing was, that was one thing when Andy said, like, oh, Glenn loved playing with me. I said to me, because he could hit as hard as he could. I never complained, because at the time, in the late 80s, and during the 80s, like, part of my reputation was I was a really loud, hard-hitting drummer. And which at the time I definitely viewed as an asset. I remember seeing this interview with Dave Grohl where he talked about when he first went out, his thing was, I just wanted to be the guy that when people saw me play, they were just like, holy shit, can you believe how hard that drummer was hitting the drums? And can you I wanted them to walk out of there going like, I can't believe that drummer. And that was kind of my attitude too. Like, I wanted them to remember me. I wanted them to be like, that was the guy that like every snare hit started up here, like, and I was putting my whole body and every force of my being into what I was doing, And when I joined Blue Rodeo, I had to dial that back, and I actually had to dial that back with Andrew Cash too. I had to dial that back with a lot of people, and it took me years to learn to do that. Partly because that was, especially when I was younger, that was very much part of my energy. And I'm still known as a hard-hitting drummer, but I hope I'm also known now as a dynamic drummer and someone who's capable of playing very softly when required. And but that was something I had to adapt to with Blue Rodeo. So, but I went in there confident because I certainly knew that I could pull off whatever was required of me technically, to do the record and to be in the band. But it was more the process of having to contain myself that was challenging and kind of has remained challenging over the years with Rodeo.
So it's an exercise in restraint and also playing what's best for the song and not necessarily the ego showing off what you could actually do with your talent.
Exactly. Like, so, when I first joined Blue Rodeo, I was saying, I was still playing double pedals. And if you listen to Lost Together, at the end of some of the songs where there's like sort of scrubs where the band's going, blah, 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 like you can hear the double bass drum going like, and I have live recordings of me with the band from that period, from the early 90s, where I still was playing double pedals, and sometimes it sounds like the drummer from Megadeth is sitting in with Blue Rodeo. Like, it's just all kinds of wrong. And it took me a couple of years before I realized, I think I should stop playing the double pedal with these guys. It's just not really right,
I was just in Montreal to see Megadeth, so I can picture the drummer that I have that clear as day. And I think it could actually work with those drums with maybe a heavy remix of some Blue Rodeo songs.
Yeah, I would save it for the outros of some songs or something, but it was still like when I listened to those live recordings, I'm like, oh man, I'm glad I stopped doing that because that is just not right. And they were very tolerant. They let me. I think it was because it was the early 90s, and at the time, grunge was huge, and the band was definitely kind of dabbling with elements of that. Greg went and got a big muff pedal, and grew his hair long and curly, the grunge thing was influencing everybody at the time, even if it was just a little bit, And so at that point, Rodeo also when I joined, Rodeo kind of got louder than ever, partly because of grunge and also because like, hey, we have this new really loud drummer. And so, we were, during the Lost Together tour, we were super loud, and which we ended up having to dial back because that was at that point that Greg got tinnitus, and he was like, I got tinnitus, we have to be quieter, And so then there became years of trying to be quieter,
Greg starts to look like Eddie Vedder up there with his long hair.
He had long curly blonde hair when I joined. Yeah, if you look at what you can see on the cover of Lost Together, and then there's pictures of him with his long blonde hair. But yeah, that was sorry. Well, that was just the thing at the time, But after that record, we did 5 days, and we did a complete about face, and we made an acoustic record. Which I remember at the time going, oh my God, an acoustic record. Can we just get this? And they were like, yeah, and you just played brushes and things. I'm like, what? Okay, well, we'll just do this and we'll get this out of the way, and then we'll go back to making proper rock records, And little did I know that was our future, really. I mean, if anything defined or redefined the band, it was 5 days in July doing that record, completely redefined the band. But that's another story.
Yeah, we'll dive into that album in a second. I have some kind words sent in from a dear friend of yours. This is Juno Award winner Colin Linden from Blackie and the Rodeo Kings, amongst other projects. Colin says, Glenn plays with such passion and joy. We played together quite often many years ago, and that fire, spirit, and soul that he had then as a musician and a human is still evident when I hear Blue Rodeo now. Glenn had a sense of freedom in his playing that I used to love when I heard him with White Noise almost 40 years ago. And I think that continues to inform and inspire the music he plays today. Also, more simply, Glenn has the chops of a great jazz player, but plays roots music with the soul and respect of someone who really loves it. A great musician. Please send him my love, from Colin.
Oh, that's super sweet of Colin. That's really nice. Yeah, I used to substitute for Gary Craig, who was the drummer, still plays with Colin. Gary Craig is a great Toronto drummer. Played with Anne Murray years ago. Then he played with Colin Linden, and he's been the drummer for Blackie and the Rodeo Kings since the very beginning. He plays with Jan Arden. And he was actually playing with Colin. I had to learn Gary Craig's drum parts, and that was actually, I would say that learning Gary's parts was an important part of my education, because Gary he's a very different drummer from me. He played with a lot of economy, and I mean, he has a lot of chops, but Gary has always worked really steadily, and singer-songwriters love him because he plays, first of all, he has a beautiful pocket, he has great time, and but he plays exactly what the song needs. And listening to his drumming and learning his drum parts helped me learn about how to play a song and how your drum part should develop with the song. Like he would do things, I would notice things like, oh, in the first verse, he doesn't play a fill, but then he plays a fill in the second verse, but it's like a short fill. But then in the third verse, he plays a fill in the same spot, but it's a longer fill, and I sort of see how he would, tell a story, through his drumming, how the kind of his drumming would be kind of a plot line that developed, just like you would hear in the arrangement of the song. And so learning his parts and playing with Colin kind of taught me that about the value of economy and of how letting your parts develop through a song. So you're not just like, here it is, like right at the song, here's everything in the kitchen sink, look what I can do, which is, was kind of more my instinct when I was younger. So yeah, that was a great education. And I'm actually, I was trying to make a list of people I played with, and Colin was someone who I forgot, because I played with so many people over the years. It's really hard to remember everybody, but Colin was a very important artist who I got to play with in the late 80s, and who was an important part of my development. So that's nice you mentioned him.
So your first album with Blue Rodeo, Lost Together, comes out in 1992. That goes double platinum. Mm-hmm. Then your second album in 1993 is 5 Days in July, goes 6 times platinum. That's the band's best selling and probably most iconic album. So I'd say that's not a bad start with your new band. And I had a question about, sometimes when a band member joins a band, or the new band member, they can get relegated to the background. But when I listened to that album, Lost Together, it looked like the band was actually showcasing you. I'll just, on a few songs here. So Restless, The Big Push, Will and Fool, Flying, Where Are You Now, and Angels, to me, seems like they're actually showcasing you as like the new secret weapon that they have. Do you agree that you kind of had a spotlight on your first album? And what did it mean to you if you agree that they had such confidence in you as the newest member and not just an afterthought, barely keeping time in the background.
Right. Well, I don't think there was anything where they were intentionally showcasing me. I think some of that was, when I joined the band, like I say, I was kind of a more aggressive player, and more aggressive, and maybe sort of had busier parts, and also those songs had a lot of spots that stretched out, where I could sort of do my thing. So I think it was just a byproduct of how the songs were and how I was as a player at the time. And subsequent after that, there was a lot more of, okay, we need to rein this in here, especially after doing 5 days, where the drumming is entirely understated. There's no sticks on that record at all. It's all brushes. There's songs on that record where I'm just playing brushes on a suitcase, like that's the drum part, So we kind of went in the opposite direction after Lost Together. But I think it was just where the band was at and where I was at. And I think at first they were kind of like, oh, we got this new drummer that can do all this stuff. So yeah, let him do it, And then I think it was after that they kind of went like, oh, we don't really need all that stuff, because they truly didn't. It wasn't necessarily, some of those elements that, like say on Willing Fool or something, it still happens. I still have parts where I can, show off a bit on the drums, or there's songs with more fills, but it's also less of a concern of mine than say it was in the early 90s. There was a part of me in the early 90s, and really, for a while, it was still like wanting to put myself forward and kind of using any opportunity to show off a little, whereas after that, as I've matured as a player, it's a lot more about like, what does the song need, as opposed to how many notes can I squeeze in here, So I think, if the drums seem more forward or showcased on that record, it's really just because of that's where we were at that period of time, and then we kind of went to other places,
So the album's Lost Together and 5 Days in July. They kick off a run of 12 consecutive albums that are certified gold, platinum, or multi-platinum. That might be one of the best runs in Canadian music history. The album was nominated for a Juno Award, Album of the Year. So not just any nomination, but that's the most prestigious as a band, I would think. What does that first Juno nomination mean to you? I mean, there's 30 some nominations, along the way, but that first one for you, did that mean something special?
Well, I got to be honest. I think, I wonder if that was the one. I don't think that was one where we won Group of the Year. No, it wasn't. That was a little later. I can't even remember if did we win Album of the Year for Lost Together? We didn't win it.
So Lost Together, you were nominated, and
right.
And maybe the next album is the big one. So I'm not.
I don't think we won Album of the Year. My first Juno with Rodeo was actually Group of the Year. I have it up here, and I remember I've always been kind of a little ashamed because when we won, I should backtrack a bit. Like, to be honest, awards have never meant that much to me. I'm happy to get them. They were already winning awards when I joined, so I never felt like, yay, I earned this. I was just kind of like, I jumped on this bandwagon, and along with it comes award shows. And what the Junos meant to me was an opportunity to play the Junos. So the year that we got nominated for Lost Together, I don't even remember the nomination, to be honest. What I remember is playing the Junos and hanging out backstage and meeting all these other musicians, and I remember that year we played a tribute to Ian and Sylvia, where we played a medley of Ian and Sylvia songs with like Jane Siberry and all these other sort of guest artists. And at the time, I didn't really even know. I'd never even heard Four Strong Winds before. Like, I was from such a different place musically. I didn't even really know any Ian and Sylvia songs, you know. But so I just had to do that. So what I remember is doing the performance and being backstage with all my, you know, musical buds. And I remember hanging out with the Bare Naked Ladies, because Tyler, the drummer for the Bare Naked Ladies, used to be my next door neighbor, you know. So we were pals. You know,
hold on. Yeah. What's with all your neighbors being drummers?
Well, in those days,
that was your original inspiration, and then
well, yeah, I was. Well, in those days in Toronto, like, you know, all the musicians live downtown. Like, now that doesn't happen anymore because downtown's too expensive, and all the musicians are in like Hamilton, or, you know, they're spread out. There's fewer musicians living in the city than there used to be because it's just less affordable. But everybody lived downtown. And, you know, like, you know, I remember I had a house on Bathurst Street, and next door there was Ian Blurton from Change of Heart, and Bernard, the keyboard player from Change of Heart, and Mike Belitsky lived nearby, who became the drummer for the Sadies. And I remember Andrew Scott from the Sloan coming over to my house to jam. Actually gave him a drum lesson, and you know. And yeah, Tyler Stewart lived next door. Like, so there's always musicians around. So, but yeah, the Junos to me, it was more about. It's always been about being at the ceremony and playing and hang and the parties afterwards, and that's always. And the rewards are nice, but not something I take too seriously. I'm way more concerned with playing good shows, making good records, and enduring, you know, and all that's like now we don't get nominated for Junos anymore. Like, and that is 100% fine with me, because we got lots of nominations. We won quite a few, and which is nice. You know, I'll see if you can. Yeah, there they are. I got a bunch of them up there.
Oh, wow.
in the middle thing. You know, there's what do we got up there? There's Canada's Walk of Fame. There's the Governor General's Award for the Performing Arts. There's Canadian Music Hall of Fame. And then, but some of them are like DVD of the year. You know, that's like obsolete. You know, it's like I got an award for you know, a medium that is now completely obsolete. You know, so the rewards are nice, but it's not, you know, eventually they're history, and what matters now is what really matters is, like, I'm still doing this. Like, you know, what matters is what's happening right now today, and am I making music? And is more music coming? You know, that's all I've really cared about. So it was fun to be part of the rewards, but to be part of the ceremonies, it's always fun to be part of those things. But I have a lot of Blue Rodeo sales awards. None of them are on my walls because first of all, they're ugly. And second of all, it's just kind of not what's really important to me. If I was going to have something on my walls, it might be more of like a poster of a memorable show or something like that. That's kind of more important to me. And I'm not downplaying. I'm not saying I don't appreciate those awards and things like that, but they just don't hold an important place in my heart, like the actual memories of actually playing and you know, my memories of my experiences with my fellow musicians are what is truly dear to me.
I saw Sting once go up to accept an award, and he said music is its own reward, which was basically what you're saying. You know, you appreciate the awards, but it's not about that. It's about the relationship with the other band members. It's about being the best musician you can be. It's about creating timeless music. As an entrepreneur, hearing your answer, I feel like there's an opportunity here where I could start a company that designs beautiful plaques for awards that might be worth putting up. So
yeah, well, a lot of that, the ugly part, is because most of my awards came during the CD era. So you got all these like framed CDs, you know, it's just not
These
they're not,
plastic
yeah,
discs
yeah,
up
they're
there.
not, it's not beautiful. The when you actually had like gold and platinum records, those were kind of cooler, you know. But yeah, CDs, you know, framed CDs are not necessarily something you want to have all over your walls. And I, like I say, it's just not the most important thing to me. You know, it just isn't.
The last thing I'll say about the Junos is what's funny is on Twitter. So I was promoting this episode. I was getting questions from the fans, and someone corrected me. So I put Blue Rodeo's won an unprecedented 12 Juno Awards, and someone from a major Toronto newspaper, it was either like the Toronto Sun or the Globe and Mail. This is like a legit writer. He goes, actually, I'm pretty sure it is precedented. And then I had to go check, and it's true that like Celine Dion and Shania Twain and the Tragically Hip, even though winning 12 and being nominated for 30 plus is like you're in the top 10 of all time, it
Right.
is precedented. So I got corrected by someone. Anyways, I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, you know, it's hard to be first. To kind of always be in first place with things.
Well, as long as you're not last, I suppose. So going back into the first album, and then we'll move on to the next one. So obviously the album Lost Together had the song Lost Together, which is one of Blue Rodeo's signature songs. Do you remember the first time you guys started working on what would become that song? Do you have any memories of that song kind of coming to fruition, and if you had any idea that could become a massive hit?
Well, to be honest, I don't remember actually rehearsing that song. I remember recording it. I remember being in the studio, and I remember Jim saying to Greg, because the previous album, Casino, I think all the hits were Jim's. I'm trying to think. Oh, Greg had What Am I Doing Here? What Am I Doing Here was the big song for Greg from Casino. But Jim had Till I Am Myself. He had After the Rain. Those are the two big ones for him on Casino. I can't remember if there was another. But so Jim kind of had the more radio play. And I remember him saying to Greg about Lost Together, he's like, we got a hit for you on this one, buddy. You know, like, Jim knew that it was going to be big. He knew that it was a hit song. I did not know that. I was not. I can't say I've ever predicted, like. I'd say there's an odd time where I thought, like, okay, like when years later when we recorded the song Bulletproof for record Palace of Gold that came out in 2002, I remember thinking, that's a hit song. Like, that's a beautiful song. Still one of my favorite Jim songs. Like, it was just such a beautifully crafted song. I just thought there's no way that this song isn't going to do well. But I can't say I was listening to that. I thought Lost Together was going to be massive, but I knew it was going to do well. I mean, the thing is, at that point, I remember thinking this band could release an album of fart sounds and it would sell 100,000 copies, which was true at the time. And, so it was kind of, I kind of had the smug satisfaction of being in a band like that. But I didn't predict that it was going to be a hit. I remember working on the song in the studio. I remember Greg describing the drum fills he wanted that are sort of in the intro, when it's strange and beautiful are the stars tonight, the dance around your head, do, the kind of Ringo fills, like they're like the drum fills in A Day in the Life. But he also played me this record called Dillard and Clark. Dillard and Clark was this guy, Doug Dillard, and who I believe was in like a country band called the Dillards, or like an early sort of country rock band called the Dillards. And Gene Clark was a member of the Byrds. So these guys came together and they made this classic early country rock record, like 1968. And the opening song on that, I think, was called Out on the Side. And it had drum fills in it that he played for me. And he's like, I want you to do drum fills like this for Lost Together, So that was kind of the template for that part of the song. And then and then I just remember recording the song at Manta. I remember shooting the video and which was, I think that was the first video we shot, and that was kind of a big deal. You know, that was back in the days when you spent $100,000 on videos. You know, 50 or $100,000 on videos.
The good old days.
Yeah, they don't even spend that much on making records anymore. You know, like, never mind videos. But you know, that's when there was more income, you know, coming in from records. So yeah, I remember that, and then I remember, you know, the single doing really well, and being very happy about that. But I, at the time, because the band had been so successful, I was confident that all that was going to happen, you know, and it did, you know. The success of 5 days was something that took me by surprise, and that I could not have predicted. That I did not predict. I thought that was just more of a transition record. Like, we're going to do this. It was initially just going to be an EP. It was, and so we were going to do this acoustic EP. We're just going to throw it out, and then we're going to do another, what to me was a proper rock record where I could use sticks again and do my thing, you know, like. So yeah, but yeah, Lost Together was, you know, and I also would not have known that that song was going to be as enduring as it has been. I mean, it's still, we close with it every night, and it's safe to say we will do that for the rest of our career. That every Blue Rodeo concert from now till we stop is going to end with Lost Together, and I could not have predicted that it was going to be such an enduring song.
So I have a fan question here, if you have a short answer for him. So this is from Jeffrey Stone, who's a great singer-songwriter here in Ottawa. He says, I'm always interested in the origin story of band names and how they come up with them. Curious how Blue Rodeo got their name.
Well, I wasn't there. So
any guesses or any fabricated stories you could share? You could make one up right now.
They've told me about it, and I think it was just I believe Greg came up with the name, and I think it was just coming up with 2 words to describe the band's sound. The blue being, you know, at the time they had their ballads like Try, and you know, those songs were already written when the band was formed. Like when they formed the band, they already had Rose-Colored Glasses. They had Try. They had, you know, a bunch of tunes. So they already had an idea of what their band was going to sound like. And they knew, you know, and Jim, they knew that, so they were going to have ballads, but they were also going to have these rollicking kind of country flavored songs. And that, the roots thing came from, so Jim and Greg, I'm going to go back a bit with Jim and Greg. Jim and Greg's first band was called the Hi-Fives. And that was a band that existed in the mid-late 70s. I would say late 70s. And that was very influenced by Elvis Costello in particular, and the Beatles. And so it was kind of power pop, new wave sounding stuff. Then they moved to New York, where they then changed the band name to Fly to France. And they continued to play some of the material they had. Like there's actually online, you can find a video of Fly to France playing an early version of Rose-Colored Glasses. And it's Jim and Greg with these 2 New York guys as a rhythm section. And it's like a much faster version of Rose-Colored Glasses. It's like a new wave version of Rose-Colored Glasses. But while they were in New York, and they started to pine for the Canadian thing, and Greg was listening to a lot of Gordon Lightfoot. And he was like, let's go back to Canada and start a new band that is sort of more Canadian in flavor, and let's embrace our Canadian roots. And when they went back to Toronto, there was this guy named Handsome Ned, who was very big on the scene in Toronto at the time. And Handsome Ned was essentially a country artist, a country and rockabilly guy. And he had a band called Handsome Ned and then another band called the Sidewinders. And he was a great singer. He was very charismatic. And Jim and Greg loved this guy and got really influenced by him. And so they were kind of like, okay, this is the direction of the band. We're going to do this kind of rockabilly, country meets new wave thing. And so that's kind of where the rodeo things come from. So Blue Rodeo is essentially, I'm sorry, this was supposed to be a short answer.
That's all good. That's all
I
good.
don't have any short answers. So it's Blue being the combination of the sort of ballads, and Rodeo being the kind of rollicking country influence side of their music. You put it together, Blue Rodeo, and that's kind of the origin of the band.
Can we get the long answer now?
You're only getting long answers out of me. I've had a lot of coffee.
Oh, that's all good. You're all jacked up on caffeine. I have
Yeah.
some kind words sent in from Jake Boyd, who's the drummer for the rock band Colorado.
Yeah,
so he's a great dude. I just saw him the other day at a venue here in Ottawa. He says, I mean, he literally might actually be the best drummer in the country. That's not even me being nice. It just may in fact be true. Jake Boyd from Colorado.
Oh, again, that's an entirely subjective thing, but a very sweet thing to say. And I don't think there's no such thing as the best drummer in the country. You know what I mean? Because or the best, there's such a thing as like the fastest runner in the country, but there's no such thing as the best drummer or the best guitar player. There's just your favorite, like whoever your favorite is.
Yeah.
And there are many, many drummers who are more technically accomplished, like literally thousands of drummers in Canada who could play circles around me, or, in terms of technique or whatever. But that's a lovely thing to say, and that's very kind of him. And, like I say, I'm the best Glenn Milchem out there. And he's the best Jake Boyd. Again, I could not touch Jake Boyd at being Jake Boyd.
That's very true. So the album comes out 5 days in July, 6 times platinum, 5 singles. I'll read them off. 5 Days in May, Hasn't Hit Me Yet, Bad Timing, Till I Gain Control Again, and Head Over Heels. I remember my dad having that album, as well as later on the Greatest Hits album. He was playing that album when I was 8 years old. I remember hearing that album around the house. So that was a staple of music, staple of our house anyways.
Right.
So that album was recorded at Greg's house, and it has a very live off the floor sound. Was it actually recorded live off the floor?
Yes, indeed it was.
Touch on a little bit of the recording? You said you thought it might just be an EP, and then it grew into a full length.
It did grow initially. Well, at least when the idea was first presented to me, it was kind of like, yeah, we're going to do like an acoustic EP, and we're just going to go to Greg's house. And it's going to be real casual, and we got the Comfort Sound mobile recording truck to record at Greg's house, and we set up in his living room. And Doug McClelland, who was the owner and the engineer on the recording truck, came out with his truck to record us. And we basically started out. We went to Greg's place, and this was at a time. This was before there were any solo records, from Jim or Greg. So all their writing went to Blue Rodeo, and they were both quite prolific at this time, so between them they had 30 songs for that record, and it was never an intention. And like I say, it was like, we'll do an acoustic EP. So the idea being, we'll do 5 or 6 songs that'll be acoustic, but we'll just demo. We're just going to record all these other songs. We'll just demo all these songs, see what we got, and then we're going to be doing another record that'll be like a full band rock album with electric guitars and what have you, and sticks on the drums, but so we went there and initially and just recorded everything. And I actually have cassettes still of some of that stuff actually ended up on a box set we put out some years ago. That there was a CD on that box set called Odds and Sods, and it's outtakes from various sessions, like outtakes from Casino and outtakes from 5 Days, and we had a lot of stuff. So I think when we recorded those 30 songs that they had, it became apparent that it was more than just 5 or 6 that would work well as acoustic songs. That we actually had 12 or 13 songs that would work really well as approached acoustically. So we sort of started focusing on those, and we decided, okay, we're going to do an album of this stuff. And so we recorded a bunch of stuff like that. And it was a beautiful experience for me. It was going out to Greg's place at the time. You know, we stayed over there. It was in the country. He still lives there. He lives in this beautiful spot that's sort of not far from Peterborough. It was a part of Ontario I'd never spent any time in, sort of in the Ganaraskas. And it was just, you know, gorgeous property. He had this neighbor who had a peacock that would come over every day and like hang out and like be out on the roof. Like I remember, you know, going kia kia, like screaming. You'd wake up to this peacock that would be out on the roof outside your bedroom window, and there were like horses around, and you know, it was a really sort of beautiful rural setting, and it absolutely, that setting had a huge. I really felt like it had a big effect on the vibe of the music, and sort of, and it was also the first time. You know, Greg was a bachelor at that time, and his whole house was just filled with instruments. And, you know, it was the first time I'd ever been in someone's house where every room had amps in it and vintage guitars all over the place. And he had a drum set, and he had a vintage drum set. Everything was vintage, you know, and I thought, like, oh man, like this is how to live. This is how you should spend your money, you know, just having, you know, just filling your house with instruments and just being surrounded by music all the time, you know. And I was really inspired by that. And it was a beautiful experience, just hanging out there, living there, and playing together all day. And so we did that, and I think we worked for a week or two, and then we had an Australian tour that we did. We went and toured Australia for 2 weeks, which was our first time going to Australia, and we had a great time doing that. And we spent a lot of time on that tour, like hanging out with acoustic guitars and kind of shedding and reworking the songs that we were working on at Greg's place. And then we came back and we re-recorded all the songs we'd done, kind of with a fresh take on them after being in Australia, and kind of deconstructing them a little more. And we also did a thing where we brought a lot of people. We kind of invited people over. We kind of wanted to have this communal party atmosphere, which was also kind of funny because we did that, but then when it was recording and there's all these people hanging around, you sort of realize, like, okay, we can't record with all these people hanging around yapping and stuff. So I remember like making them all go outside and shut up.
They have to hang out with the animals.
Yeah, like, be quiet. Okay, now we're recording. And so they'd all be like outside, like looking in the windows and stuff like that while we're recording, you know, head over heels or something. And so we did the majority of the record in 5 days. And that is where the title comes from, 5 Days in July, because that was in July. So I'd say about 80% of the record was recorded in that second session during 5 days. And that's why, though the song refers to the song 5 Days in May, which is the lead-off song on the record, but it was, the bulk of the album was recorded in 5 days in July, and so that's why the album is called 5 Days.
So was that song recorded in May then, or?
No, 5 Days in May was recorded in.
Sorry, was it written? Sorry, was it written? I'm just wondering why the difference between the song title and the album title. 5 Days in May
was titled 5 Days in May because it's a story about a couple that fall in love during 5 days in May. It has, you know, I believe it's a fictional song. It's actually loosely based on a story our then sound engineer, our live sound guy, Ken McNeil, told this story to Jim, where every time he was on tour and he went to a beach, he would write his wife's name in the sand. It was this kind of romantic thing he did. And that's where Jim got that was the germ of the idea for Jim. So, you know, where, you know, there's a line like he wrote her name in the sand, never even let go of her hand, you know, like that line. That was kind of, Jim sort of started there and then just
extrapolated using his imagination the rest of the story. So, you know, it's essentially fiction. I don't necessarily think Ken and his wife met and fell in love during 5 Days in May. I think that Jim made that part up. But, you know, that's how songs get written. You know, you start with some little idea and then just make the rest of it up, you know. And so, yeah, no, the 5 Days in May was not written in May. It's just a fictional story about a couple who fall in love during 5 Days in May.
That was some good insider information about that.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. I have some words sent in from Rich Beto, who's the drummer for Finger 11 and Saint Sonia. He says, I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting Glenn properly, although I'm sure we passed each other and said hello in many a Canadian function hallway. But I have, however, been able to watch from a distance at his incredible career in beautifully crafted drumming. To put it simply, Glenn becomes the song he's playing. He turns a song into a living and breathing entity. His style, feel, and musicianship with his bands is unmatched, and he is a Canadian treasure. I've seen Glenn play for 200 people at the Horseshoe and 10,000 people at the Budweiser stage, and if I close my eyes for either, I know it's Glenn that's on the drums. So Rich from Finger 11.
Oh, that's a super nice thing to say. Thank you very much, Rich. That's really nice. Because, you know, I guess one of the highest compliments you can pay a musician is saying that you recognize their sound. And, you know, everybody kind of wants to have their own sound. And that's not necessarily something I pursue. Like, I don't necessarily go like, I got to have my sound. Like, I pursue the right sound for whatever song I'm playing or whatever song I'm recording. I don't sort of go like, you got to have the Glenn Milchem stamp on this, you know, like you know, if a song demands something that doesn't sound like me at all, then I will play that. So it's still nice to know that someone feels they can identify my sound or my feel from my playing. So I appreciate that. That's very kind of them to say that.
So when I interview musicians for the podcast, normally they have 3 albums, 4 albums, maybe 5 albums. And I do a deep dive. I listen to the entire discography to really get into it. In your case, Blue Rodeo has 16 albums, a couple greatest hits, a few live albums. The different members have solo projects. You've worked with other artists. So I had my work cut out for me, but I like a good challenge. So are you able to rapid fire through just a few of the projects you worked on outside of Blue Rodeo? So it's crazy that despite how prolific the band was, you somehow were able to work with all these other artists at the same time.
Yeah, I'm on many dozens of records, and I can't even possibly remember them all.
Any that stand out, and we can. I do want to take time to talk about your solo album from 2019, and then Blue Rodeo's new album in 2021 as well. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, ones that stand out, I guess. Well, you know, I mentioned some like the Change of Heart record, Smile. You know, there's the records I was on the early 80s or the mid 80s, some of which may not be well known to people, but were kind of influential, like Plasticine Replicas is a band that comes to mind who are no longer remembered and who are almost impossible to find online except for a couple of videos on YouTube. But they were a really important band, an influential band in Toronto in the 80s. I played on their record. I guess, you know, Andrew Cash, like I mentioned. I'm on Jane Siberry's album When I Was a Boy. I played on one song on that. Actually what I played on that was there's a song there called The Temple, which is the opening track of that. And she had a sample from When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin, and to use that sample cost $10,000. So they hired me to go to Metalworks in Mississauga and basically play the groove to When the Levee Breaks, and then they just, you know, and they use that as a song. But gosh, I'm on a lot of records, so it's hard to it's hard to think of them all. You know, like
you got the 4 albums from the Swallows, right?
Those are my that is my solo band, the Swallows. I do have a list here. Let's see. all the bands that I mentioned did put out records, like Andy Curran, Soho 69, things like that. While I was with Rodeo, I recorded with Luke Doucette and Melissa McClelland, who subsequently became Whitehorse.
Hayden, I was a big fan of Hayden when I was 18.
Yeah,
in 2004, I was listening to Hayden during college.
And I recorded a couple of tracks with Hayden over the years, but that's not someone I would say I've worked with extensively. In terms of records, Ian Thornley, Joan Smith and the Jane Does, a band I played with recently. Tara Lightfoot, I'm recording with her now, but I haven't put anything out. It's hard to think of all the records I've been on. I've been on Greg Keeler. I was on Greg Keeler's last solo record, actually, which actually kind of happened by accident, because he recorded his solo album, his last solo album, which is called Share the Love. He recorded that with a different drummer, but then that drummer, Dan Neal, who's a great drummer, Daniel Neal, and Greg recorded with a band of people mostly from the Peterborough area, including Jim Boskill, who is now a member of Blue Rodeo and who also plays with the Sheepdogs, and some other musicians. And then he wanted to make a live video playing all the songs from the record. And because Dan Neal had moved to Newfoundland at that point, so he asked me if I would play drums on it. And so we did a live performance of the record, and he liked that so much that he made that the album release. He released that instead of, he actually released, I think he released the studio version on vinyl, or he released that on CD, I think, and then he released the live version that I played with him on vinyl and download. So I did that. I think I'd have to go up and look at my record collection to think of other records I've played on, but there's been a lot. And yeah, the Swallows are a band that I had from 99 to 2011. I formed that when I released 4 CDs with that band, and I played guitar and sang in that band and wrote the songs for that band. On the records, I often played most or all of the instruments as well, but it would also have the band as well. So
was that an outlet for music that was outside of the Blue Rodeo realm?
Yeah, well, I've been writing songs since I was 16, and I just wanted to put some songs out, and try my hand at doing that. I'd always kind of wanted to do that, and one of the things that impressed me about Bobby Wiseman was when he was in Blue Rodeo, he also started releasing solo records and had a parallel solo career as a solo artist, and did quite well. So that was something I thought, like, oh, that's the thing to do, like getting a band that's like, working and putting records out and it has a steady career, and then do your own thing at the same time. Like that's a cool thing. I want to do that. And I ended up following in his footsteps a lot more closely than I realized I was going to. But yeah, that was basically the idea. So it was never something that was like a full-time pursuit. It was kind of more like, I always called it an expensive hobby. But I did that.
So in 2019, you put out a solo album. So this is Fates Conspire. And This is a beautiful collection of 9 songs that are acoustic, stripped down. And my favorite songs, having listened to it, I got it written down here. So Wrench, St. Elmo's Fire, Fates Conspire, and 3 Chords. Those are my favorite songs on the album.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
What inspired you to release a solo album at this point in your storied career?
I think that, I just did it because I had to break up my band. I have 4 kids. 4 kids that are pretty spread out. My eldest son is 36. I mentioned earlier when we were talking that I was 22 when my first son was born, and then I had a daughter who's now 23. So my son, when I was 22, my son is now 36, and then I had a daughter who's now 23, and then I've had 2 children who are now 11 and 13. And so when my youngest, my 11-year-old son, was born, I just realized I didn't have time to have a band, like to lead a band anymore. Because it wasn't, if it was profitable, I could have kept doing it. I could have said, oh, I got to keep doing this. I'm, raking it in or whatever. But it was kind of it broke even at best. So I just didn't have, I think I had just released the 4th Swallows record when my son was born. And I remember trying to organize a rehearsal, and everybody else in the band at that point were also professional musicians. And I remember it taking something like 30 emails to organize a rehearsal. And I had like a baby and a 3-year-old and a teenage daughter, and I was just like, I don't have time to do this anymore. So I kind of set all that aside. But then, years later, I was still writing songs, and I was kind of leaning more towards, like, the Swallows were a loud rock band. And I was kind of leaning towards, I'd been listening to softer music, and I was kind of leaning towards the idea of playing softer music. But I didn't want to, and I kind of just felt like I wanted to put something out in the world. And I wanted to try and do an acoustic thing. And I wanted to be stripped down and I wanted it to be live off the floor. I wanted it to be without overdubs or edits, though in the end, there were 1 or 2 edits, and I think there's 1 overdub on the thing where I think my wife sang harmonies on one song, actually. And so I just did that with a buddy of mine, John Bora, who's a great local musician, singer-songwriter, and also bass player. And he played bass in the Swallows for the 10 years that the band existed. And he's also a very good recording engineer and live sound man, so he recorded it for me. And I just did it. I just wanted to do a low-budget recording and just put it out online. I didn't want to, press CDs or records and feel like I got to get rid of them all and stuff like that. So I just put it out, and I just kind of let it hang there. And it's not something I've gone out of my way to promote or anything like that. I've never been good at promoting my own music. I love recording. I love writing songs. I love making music. I have a really hard time going out there going, I'm great, you should listen to me. I guess, and I think some of that is I'm not as confident as a singer-songwriter as, say, I am as a drummer. Though I'm feeling a little more confident these days. But like even that record, I kind of put it out, and then I just kind of went, okay, I'm done with that. So yeah, I put it out in 2019. But interestingly enough, like my wife is a camera operator, and she shot all the recording that we did with the idea that we would put out videos of each song, me doing the songs live. But then her mom had a stroke, and so she kind of had devoted all her spare time to looking after her mom, so those videos never got completed. But recently John Bora, the guy who engineered it, has gotten into editing videos, and he's like, oh, can I edit some of that footage? So we just put out a video of the title track, Fates Conspire. So that's out there, but to be honest, that's behind me now, and I'd like to do another record that would at some time in the future, because I'm still writing, and I guess it'll be under my own name, and it'll probably be mostly acoustic based, but it'll probably have other musicians and stuff, but I'm not sure when that's going to happen. Right now, I'm playing with so many different artists that all my time is about learning songs and drumming right now. My focus is all on that as opposed to songwriting.
Is it true that the title track was written for your wedding?
Yeah, I wrote Fates Conspire I thought it would be nice to have an original song to sing at my wedding. So yeah,
what a romantic dude. Good for you. That's how you lock them down for life. Attaboy.
Yeah, we're pretty locked down.
That's funny. I got I got a quote from a friend of yours here. So this is Walter Sobchuk, and
Oh yeah, Walter. Yeah.
he's an amazing engineer. Worked with Sarah Slean, Bare Naked Ladies, Bruce Cockburn, and what's crazy is he worked on the Dirty Dancing soundtrack that
Oh,
sold
I didn't know that.
32 million albums, and at one point was the second best-selling album of all time. So Walter says the following words. He says, I've known Glenn, this is a long one. I've known Glenn since early 1984 when he became the drummer of Vital Signs. Our respective Toronto post-punk bands played shows together in Toronto, London, and Montreal. I love him as a person, and his drumming is extraordinarily great. I recall the London, Ontario show when Brat X remarked to me while Vital Signs were playing, look at him. He's playing two rhythms simultaneously. Then there was the Concordia University show where both bands got food poisoning from the supplied Saint-Hubert chicken. Well, except for me, as I was a vegetarian that summer. So he got out of that unscathed. He says, every time I run into him is memorably great. The last two times were a while back, but I remember each one of them. Once while walking through Baldwin Village, and another time when Glenn and his twin brother duo, the Swallows, were playing the Bovine at either North by Northeast or Canadian Music Week. So that's from Walter. Just reminiscing about the past.
Which is awesome. That's awesome. And Walter's great. Walter was in a band called Sturm Group, who were a really interesting band and definitely one of my favorite bands from the scene at that time. And and then he went on to become an engineer at Wellesley Sound and worked on a lot of records. And he was also in a band called Ragadeth with Mishi Me, who were a pretty kind of rock, hip hop, Jamaican dance hall kind of combination thing that was really something in the 90s. But actually the band he's talking about, the Swallows was my band. The band I was in with my twin brother was my brother's band called Starvin' Hungry. And that was a thing I loved to do. That was just me and him on guitar and me on drums, and his songs. And his stuff was really strong. And that was a garage rock duo. And I played with him from 1997 to 1999. And we did one recording, which you can find on Bandcamp, I think it's called Raw Like Love, and it's unreleased demos by Starvin' Hungry. Starvin' is Starvin, no apostrophe, no G, Hungry. And I thought his stuff was really great. And we did probably what Walter saw was maybe a reunion show we did about 8 or 9 years ago at the Bovine. That's probably what he saw. So that was Starvin' Hungry, not to be confused with the Swallows, which was my 4-piece band. Understandable though that he got that mixed up. So that's cool. That was nice.
This brings us to the new Blue Rodeo album. This was released in 2021, but it was right at the end, right? It wasn't December 2021, so it's only a few months ago.
Yeah, that's right. It came out, I think December or November or something, yeah.
Okay, so it had two singles so far, When You Were Wild and I Owe It to Myself. They showcase both of the singers in Blue Rodeo, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And to me, a new Blue Rodeo album is like a warm hug. It's like a sign that everything is well in the world. What were the challenges of recording? This is a pandemic album. What challenges arose from this damn pandemic lockdown?
Well, recording every Blue Rodeo record, with some exceptions, like 5 Days was actually, I would say, like a surprisingly easy record to record. And since then, almost every rodeo record has had its challenges. Mostly just band egos, battling it out. We went through a period, I think. It was after 5 Days, we did, the next album was Nowhere to Hear. And Nowhere to Hear, there was, that was when Greg realized he became diabetic. And I don't know if it coincides with his diabetes, but he started writing a lot of sort of very slow, longer songs. And there was some debate as to whether these songs were suitable for Blue Rodeo, and it caused some headbutting at the time. And I think there was a little bit of a sort of a power play going on in the band then. And Greg's solution was then to record his first solo album, which was called Gone, which was almost entirely comprised of very slow songs. And then that prompted Jim to record his first solo record, which was kind of much poppier and actually went on to do really well, and then kind of kickstarted Jim's solo career, which has sort of thrived since that time. So throughout and then when everybody started doing solo, so I did the Swallows. Even Basil put out a solo record called Matinee, and Basil started working on more projects. So everybody started doing all these other projects, and then everybody started seeing themselves as a producer. So every Blue Rodeo record was like all these guys going, no, I think we should do it this way, and like, so there's been a lot of headbutting over the years, to the extent that, after the last Blue Rodeo record before this one, which was 1,000 Arms, and which was also when that last tour happened, where Greg was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm too burnt out. This is, this is too much for me. And the recording of that record was frustrating for him. I don't think he felt creatively satisfied at the end of that recording, and he felt like there was sort of too much headbutting and too much compromise on his part. So that was like, between that record and this one, and the recording this one, was a 5-year chunk of time. That was the longest we've ever gone between recording albums. And I was kind of like, are we even going to make another record? Are we ever going to go on tour again? There was a big question mark over the band during those 5 years. And then COVID happened. But during COVID, Greg recorded his solo record and kind of found his mojo again as a songwriter. And part of that was because he was working with all these people from Peterborough, like Jim Boskill, this other great guitar player who plays with Jim a lot, named Kyler Tapscott, who plays in Jim's band called Jim Boskill and the Hometown Buttes. He was playing with Melissa Payne, who's a singer-songwriter from Peterborough, and James McKenty, who is formerly, he was a former member of the Spades, who were a popular band from Peterborough, and who is also, he's a recording engineer, and he recorded our third last record. What the hell is that record called? I can't remember. What is it called? Now the name is escaping me. But anyway, our third last record, the one before 1,000 Arms, he recorded that. But he's also an excellent musician, so he was in Greg's solo band. So Greg was just cranking out all these tunes and writing all these songs. So he recorded his solo record, and then he had a bunch of songs for the new Blue Rodeo record. And Jim had a bunch of songs, and they agreed we got to do a record. But because of COVID, we had to record separately, because Greg being diabetic, was reluctant to leave his home. He didn't want to come into the city to record. Just kind of wanted to stay local. And so at no point did the whole band get together to work out these songs, it was all kind of done individually. So, they each sent, so Greg recorded a bunch of demos of the songs with his Peterborough folks, and then sent those demos to everybody else in Blue Rodeo and was like, these are how the tunes go. So those songs were already partly recorded. Jim Boskill had already recorded his parts. Greg had already recorded his vocals. And there were drum and bass parts that were that were kind of his guidelines that were going to be re-recorded by Basil and I. And then Jim did demos of his own at Blue Rodeo Studio in Toronto, the Woodshed, Greg had recorded all his stuff. Jim Boskill has a studio in Coburg called Ganaraska Recording Company, and that's where Greg had demoed his stuff, and Jim demoed his stuff at Blue Rodeo's Woodshed studio. So we all got sent demos of the stuff and how it's supposed to go, and then we just all went in. I went in one day at the Woodshed and I recorded Jim's 5 songs, and then I went one day to Ganaraska Recording Company in Coburg, and I did Greg's 7 songs, and that was it. That was like, I did all my parts in 2 days, and that's what everybody did. And because of that, it was the lowest stress, least conflicted album that Blue Rodeo has made since 5 Days in July, which is really good because with us, you know, like I've been in the band 30 years. The band was around 7 years before that. Jim and Greg have been, you know, together like for 50 years or something. You know, there's a lot of water under the bridge, you know, and you know, there was a thing happening when we get together and record where there'd be like friction, there'd be like past resentments would surface, you know, and there was none of that with this record. And so it was actually a beautiful thing. It was actually, in hindsight, it was like an ideal way for us to record, because we could make a record together that without any conflict or resentment, and we could sort of put all that stuff behind us. And as it turned out, the end result, like Greg happened to also have the strongest batch of songs he's had in years, and you know, Jim also had a very good batch of songs, and Jim's a remarkably consistent songwriter. And so we, you know, I'm really happy with the record. I think it's a really strong record. I think it flows together really well. The songs are really fun to play live, and so it all worked out. It all worked out really well, and which was really nice at this point in our career, because you know, it's not easy to stick around as long as we have and make something that still feels vital, you know?
So you just talked a lot about the recording process. We have a fan question from a mother-daughter duo. This is Janet and Taylor Evans. Their question is, what is your favorite part of the recording process?
Well, I would say actually my favorite part of the recording process is usually, in the case of Blue Rodeo, the way we normally record is we get together and we hear a song for the first time and we learn it together, and then we arrange it together. And usually the songwriter will have specific things that he wants. Like I hear this on the drums. Sometimes it's like, do what you feel. And sometimes it's like, you know, usually Jim is more like a do what you feel guy, and Greg is more like, I have someone with very specific ideas of how he wants to approach it. Like he'll even sing you drum fills he wants to hear, you know, like say the drum parts on Greg's songs on the new record, you're listening to Greg's ideas there as translated by me, you know. And actually they were first translated by another drummer from Peterborough, Ian McEwen, who actually played bass and drums on the demos. And that's him translating Greg's ideas, and then I'm translating what Ian did.
You're the interpreter.
So like, yeah. So like with Greg, you're often interpreting Greg's ideas, but with Jim, he has a little more free reign. But I enjoy that process a lot. The process of sort of arranging the songs together. That's usually my favorite thing. But in the case of this record, that wasn't part of it. It was more about just going in there and executing. And I love actually just recording. I love it when, you know, when you're rolling and you got to make it happen, you know. I love that too. I love recording. So I guess my favorite part is, you know, I kind of love the whole process. But I have to say, once it's done, I don't want to hear it. And that's the part. I love the whole thing, except don't ask me to listen to it afterwards. Don't ask me what I think about, if I'm really happy with it. Like, I'm happy with it. I'm happy with it. You know, when I've left the studio and I know I've done the best I can, I'm happy with it. When I hear it later, I'm always going to hear something I wish I did differently. or I wish somebody else did differently. Oh, why did they do that? Like, and that's the part I don't like. After that, it's out in the world, and I don't really want to revisit it unless I have to.
That's the
But
curse of
everything else
being
I
a
love.
perfectionist, is always hearing what could be done, you know?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I don't particularly enjoy listening to myself afterwards. Unless it's usually if I can listen to it many years later. Like I'm good like 10 years later, because then it's so far down the road that there's nothing I can do about it, and then I can listen to it and go, oh, that was actually pretty good. But it usually takes about 10 years to get there.
That's a long process. There are songs on the new album. Some are rock, some are pop, some are folk, some are country. Is this the widest array of musical genres and influences, the widest musical spectrum on a Blue Rodeo album? Or is it just me? Am I hearing things?
I think I kind of feel like you can say that about every Blue Rodeo record, with maybe the possible exception of 5 Days, which is more specifically kind of like folk, acoustic country roots music. But I'd say, I mean, if you listen to Lost Together, there's some pretty heavy rock songs on there. There's some pop songs. There's some ballads. There's some country flavored tunes. So I'd say that kind of diversity is characteristic of the band. So I don't know if it's I would say if you were going to say what is your most diverse album musically, I would actually choose Tremolo from 1977, because there's songs on there, like there's one song, Graveyard, that's a straight up punk rock song. I mean, I even played lead guitar on that song. I'm not a very good lead guitar player, but it worked out. It worked out for that song because, like I say, it's like a punk rock song, And then also on that song are long, vibey instrumentals with a lot of improvisation, and then there's straight up country rock songs, and there's ballads, So I would actually choose Tremolo, or Tremolo, or maybe the All the Things We Left Behind, also, which is the double album we did put out. I think that came out 2004, around there, and that's also a very diverse album musically. That's got jazzy elements in it, and so I think that has always been a big part of the band's identity, that kind of musical diversity, and I just think that this record is an extension of that.
So there's a Facebook fan group on it's called Blue Rodeo Crazies. There's like 4,400 people in there. And
is there that many?
There's 4,400, and that's one of a few groups. So I infiltrated, and I got, this is a comment, not a question. So this is from Shelly Kratke from that group. She says, "Many a Mile is incredible. We are loving this tour, even with the prices of gas," with a crying, joking face. So amazing to see them all so happy. So yes, it's a nice comment.
Yeah, well, this tour has been great, and I'd say the band is actually, I feel like I've thought this before, I feel the band is definitely it's the strongest band I've been in since I joined the band. When the first lineup of the band when I joined, which was James Gray, Kim Deschamps on pedal steel, Basil, Jim, Greg, and myself. That six-piece was a very, very strong band initially, and musically. That was the band that recorded 5 Days. And especially during that period of 5 days and playing that music, we were a very, very strong band. But then tensions started to happen and things, and that band kind of lost some of its strength musically. Like, I think some of the personal conflicts that were in that band actually affected us musically. And then, the band has always been strong musically, but as members have come and gone, we've had our ups and downs. But presently, we're a 7-piece. So we have Michael Boguski on keyboards, who's a tremendous keyboard player with a he can jazz, classical, and rock background. So he's got, and we have Colin Cripps on guitar. We brought him in when Greg's hearing what became problematic enough that he no longer wanted to play electric guitar. He just wanted to switch entirely to acoustic, and so we brought Colin Cripps in as another lead electric guitar player. And so Colin has played with Colin used to be in Crash Vegas, and he was in Junk House with Tom Wilson, and he's a long-standing member of Jim Cuddy's solo band. He's been in the Jim Cuddy band since 1997, and so he's a super strong guitar player. And of course we have Jim Gregg and Basil, and then we brought in Jim Boskill when Bob Egan left our band. Bob Egan was our pedal steel player for 17 years and also multi-instrumentalist. And he played mandolin and an acoustic guitar, wonderful musician. But he sort of decided he wanted to move on from a career to music. He had a kid when he was 60 and kind of wanted to move into another career. That sort of kept him closer to home. And so we brought in Jim Boskill. And Jim is this incredible musical genius who can play everything. But he is particularly masterful at anything with strings on it. And when he first joined us, because we mostly had Colin playing electric, he kind of focused on pedal steel and violin and mandolin. But after the recording of Many a Mile, he played a lot of guitar in Many a Mile because he was kind of, with Greg. So now we have Jim on guitar as well, and Jim is a phenomenal guitar player. So we're doing shows where like we have Colin and Jim like dueling on guitars, and it's just so ripping. Like it's just it's so good. And so we have like 3 tremendous soloists in the band now. Like we have Boguski, we have Colin, and we have Jimmy, and as well as the 4 sort of core members that have been there for 30 years, myself, Basil, Basil, Jim and Greg been there since the beginning, but myself 30 years. And then, so I feel like this is the strongest version of the band that I have ever been in, like we are bulletproof, like it's going to be a good show. Like we just can't lose, so yeah, I agree. Yeah. Many Mile tours. We're killing it out there. It feels great. It's an exciting time for the band, which is a beautiful thing to say after being in it for 30 years,
And I'm excited to see that you guys just announced you have another Ottawa date. So I have it here. So I think it's June 26th at the TD, I think, what is it? The TD Tulip Festival, maybe? Give me a second. Where is that? Give me 2 seconds. Under the tour, there it is. So yeah, so you're playing on June 26th at the TD Ottawa Jazz Festival. So
Jazz Festival. Yeah. Tulips will be done by June 26th.
That's a good point. So as we wrap up, I still have a few fan questions, and I still have a few kind words sent in. So I'd be breaking hearts if I didn't get to these because they were kind enough to send them in. So are you okay if I rapid fire through a few of these for you?
Of course.
Okay, amazing. So we have a question from Twitter. This comes from Debbie Jones. And she has the greatest Twitter handle of all time. So her Twitter handle is actually just Love Blue Rodeo. That's it, at Love Blue Rodeo. That's amazing. That's a real fan. That everything she posts attached to it is Love Blue Rodeo. So just so you know that. Right. So Debbie says, I have seen Blue Rodeo around 11 times, hence my Twitter handle. Last time was December 2021 in Kitchener. I've always been drawn to their voices and lyrics, like those sunsets that leave you feeling so stoned, as an example. What was your most memorable video shoot and why? And you have a couple cool videos from the new album as well.
Most memorable video shoot. Video shoots they're always just something like, oh my God, can we just get through this? The most memorable one, I don't know, the Lost Together one was memorable because it was my first video shoot with the band, and it was when we had bigger budgets, so it was more of a big deal. I remember being in Elora, in the Elora Gorge, shooting down there for sort of these outdoor scenes where we had this fake moon above us, and then some of that was also shot in a barn at Greg's place, which has since collapsed. But that was I guess that's the first one that comes to mind as being a memorable video shoot. I also remember shooting the video for Hasn't Hit Me Yet at Greg's place. That was kind of memorable. I remember liking that video at the time, thinking it was a good video. And you know, I remember our most recent video shoot because it was recent, which was I think for "Owe It to Myself." Yeah, because the When You Were Wild is an animated video, so it was involved in that. So yeah, there's a few that come to mind.
So one of my last guests on the podcast was super producer David Bottrell. I mean, he's worked with Tool and Muse and Peter Gabriel. So he says, I worked with Glenn on the Ensign Broderick project and have seen him play live with Blue Rodeo many times. Solid as the proverbial rock and extremely creative. He drives the engine of every project he works on. I look forward to working again with him in the future. So David Bottrell.
Oh, that'd be nice. Yeah, I'd like to work with him again. He was great. Dave was great. I think, yeah, when you asked me for a quote about him, yeah, he is a fastidious producer, and I was very impressed with his methods. Very thorough and gratifying to work with because of that. Easy to work with because, you know, he could tell you exactly what he wanted and where.
Now that you say that, I remember having to say the word fastidious and having to practice it and struggling. So now I remember that I blame you for that word.
I'm expanding your vocabulary over
That's
here.
a great word, though. So another question sent in from Facebook from Jackie Andre. She says, dedicated fans know the story behind the recording of Many a Mile and how everyone was given a lot more leeway and time to lay down their parts. Going forward, would Glenn prefer recording this way?
No, and I actually wasn't given a lot more leeway, so it's funny she said that. It was quite the opposite. I did not have more time or leeway. I had to get it done quickly, and you know, and I was also, especially in the case of Greg's songs, I was playing to a template that he had already created. You know, and basically said, "I want you to do this." So it was actually less leeway than usual, but that was fine because it allowed me to be very efficient. Because the thing is that often with Greg, because he is so like, I want you to do this, and I want you to play this fill. Often that creates kind of friction because there's a part of you that goes, well, I want to do my thing, you know, like, and it eliminated all of that. It eliminated all the discussion of like, well, you know, I could do this, you know, instead of your idea. Sure, you know, you got this idea, but I've got this idea. It eliminated all that, and it made it a lot more efficient. So I would say that's good, but it's not necessarily how I would prefer to continue. I like being more collaborative. I would say, given my druthers, I would be more collaborative than we were on this record, but not necessarily a lot more because I do appreciate, like, Greg does have very specific ideas, and they're usually really good ideas, you know, like he knows what he wants. He's a very musical guy, and he does tend to think of all the instruments. He doesn't just sort of go like, I wrote this song on acoustic. What do you guys think? What should we do? Like, he's like, I want the organ to do this. I hear the bass line doing this, you know, I hear this. Like, he's always got the whole picture painted in his head. So it is, in some ways, it was a good way to work with him. Also, because he was working with people when he was initially translating those ideas, it was with people who he had no history with, you know. So there was kind of no friction. So we bypassed all that. So there are benefits to it, but I would prefer to be more collaborative. But I think we can take lessons that we learned from this approach and put that into our collaborations to make them more harmonious. And I hope that that's how we proceed in the future.
We have some kind words sent in from J.W. Jones, Juno-nominated guitarist and singer-songwriter. He says, no one plays a train groove like Glenn. Nothing is more important in a band than the backbeat being in the pocket, which is where he takes up residence and couldn't be evicted even if he tried. J.W. Jones.
Oh, that's nice of him. Yeah, it's funny, train grooves, that he mentions train grooves, because they're a big part of what I do, or just about any Canadian drummer. At some point, you're going to be asked to do train grooves. And I remember when we got the Governor General's Award for the Performing Arts, I remember thinking, like, I love Canada because it's probably the only country in the world where they'll give you a medal for playing train grooves for 20 years. There's my medal in the middle there. 20 years of train grooves, 30 years now. Got to know your train grooves.
We have a question sent in. This is the last question. This is from a drummer and a singer-songwriter named Chris Zimmerman. Have you ever dealt with playing-related injuries? And if so, how did you deal with it?
The only time I dealt with playing-related injuries was recently, and it wasn't really an injury, but one of the bands I play with now is a band called Ian Blurton's Future Now, and like I previously mentioned, Change of Heart, a band I was playing with when I joined Rodeo, and who I had to leave because I joined Rodeo. But I've continued my relationship with Ian, and he has a band now called Ian Blurton's Future Now, which is essentially a metal band or a hard rock band. And so I was been playing in that band, and I'm hitting really hard in that band, and it's a very loud band. I was hitting really hard, and I was finding that my hands were kind of getting stiff, and I was sort of losing my grip on my sticks and stuff like that. So I went and took a lesson with this guy named Adam Hay, who's a very technically minded and technically accomplished drummer, and who has worked a lot on things like grip and things like that. Because these things are all, I did take drum lessons, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about like my grip and things like that. And so he gave me some tips on how to adjust my grip so that I wasn't creating so much tension. And I like I say, I hadn't injured myself, but I felt like I was going to if I continued playing like I was. So, and I've always managed to avoid injury, because whenever I felt like injury always comes from tension. It always comes from being tense in your playing. And whenever I felt like I'm stiffening in my joints or anything like that, I've always adjusted what I'm doing to stop it. So, and in this case, that I had to be a little more drastic and sort of get some instruction because I was doing something. Also, I'm older, like when I was in my 20s, I could hit the drums as hard as I physically could and had no repercussions at all from it. But now I'm in my late 50s, and if I spend an hour and a half like hitting drums as hard as I can, I feel it. And so I have to be able to do it in a way that there's no tension in my body. So I have managed to avoid injury by just being mindful about that.
You mentioned before that you have 4 kids. Do they think their dad is a rock star, or are you just some schmuck in the house?
They think I'm a schmuck in the house. And though occasionally, like, my daughter now will say, my dad's pretty cool, because she's 23. Like, but, when you're like 13, nobody thinks their dad's cool when they're 13. They just think they're a schmuck in the house. But they like the perks of what I do. They love being backstage at shows. They like seeing the shows. What they really like is like access to endless amounts of like snacks. That's what makes me coolest, is my access to snacks and beverages that I can bring home after shows, or that they can get to backstage after shows.
These are from the riders for the Blue Rodeo shows?
Yeah, this is from riders. So yeah, they don't see me as, I don't see myself as a rock star. I see myself as a professional musician who associates with some well-known individuals like Jim and Greg, like I don't get recognized on the street. Jim gets recognized on the street, so like, I'm associated with people who are famous, and I'm not a rock star. I'm just a working musician, and because I see myself as that, they see me as that, but they see me as a working musician who has access to some cool snacks.
The final comment sent in here is from someone that actually knows your kids. So this is from platinum selling, Juno Award winning singer songwriter Holly McNarland. So she says,
"Oh yeah, Holly, yeah.
Glenn is a very kind man. Our kids went to school together about 11 years ago. Glenn was always warm and welcoming. We were new to the school and community. Watching him live is bloody amazing too. Also, he doesn't age. Why the fuck doesn't he age?" That's Holly McNarland.
Oh, that's cute. I do age. I've aged. But I've had some genetic good fortune, so like I'm not bald or graying yet. But it'll happen, But yeah, and there's one. I got to say, there's one other question that someone sent me from when I shared your post, people asking questions, you said, how long have you been drumming? And I've been drumming for 48 years. If you know, that's when I got my first drum set when I was 10, and I'm 58 now. So that's how long. Yeah.
I have two final questions for you. Can you handle the final two? These are
sure.
These are a little deeper. So when you look back on your life and career, what are you most proud of and most grateful for?
I'm most proud of the fact that I chose my own path and it worked out. And it was not an advisable, sensible path, but it was the path I had to go on. And it was a path that could have easily ended in disaster or poverty, but it was a path but I knew that, and I didn't feel I had a choice. But I believed that if I persisted, it would work out, and that turned out to be true. And so that is something that I believe very strongly in, is persistence. And so if I'm proud of any one thing, is that I have persisted, that I chose my own path, and I persisted, and it paid off. And I think that's an important thing, if in any endeavor, is whatever if you're fortunate enough to find something that you love, which I know isn't easy. I see all kinds of people around me trying to figure out what to do with their lives, and I was really fortunate that from the age of 8, I knew what I wanted to do. And then from there, and then I also had like an almost blind, unjustified self-belief, and which helps, but and that I persisted, and that's the thing that I'm proudest of, and that is the thing that I would advise anybody. Once you are on a path, you must persist, and you must believe, and you just work hard and don't diverge from that path, and it will pay off. And you'll probably maybe have to make sacrifices, and it won't be easy, and there may be some real low points, but if you persist, and if you are honest with yourself and continue to try to make yourself better at what you do, and then you'll prevail. And I'm proud that I've managed to do that.
So I normally ask my guests the wrap up question is normally, if you had a time machine, you could go back in time and you could give advice to your 10-year-old self, what would it be? And I feel like what you just said of what you're most proud of, I feel like that is perfect advice. So I don't know if you have anything different you would say to cute little 10-year-old Glenn, if you could give him advice.
Oh, the thing is, cute little 10-year-old Glenn was going to persist anyway. So the thing I would advise him to do is try not to be an asshole. Because especially coming up during the sort of punk rock thing, like when I was a young teenager, during puberty, I was definitely someone who at school got sort of teased and hassled a lot because I was different. And then that was one of the reasons that the attitude of punk was a godsend for me, because it was a fuck you attitude. It was like, I'm going to be an individual. It was an attitude about individualism, about not trying to be like everybody else. And that was a revelation for me and really important to me. But along with that came like this kind of rudeness and this kind of negative attitude that I kind of also adapted. And so I spent a lot of my early part of my career kind of being arrogant and rude. And it took me a while to grow out of that and to learn that it's actually really beneficial to be kind and to be and to be empathetic to people and just to be sweet to people and be positive. And it actually took me a long time to learn that. And I wish I could go to my 10-year-old self and just say, like, just so you know, it's actually really good to be nice, you know, and to be kind, and to support people instead of criticize them or put them down, you know, and being negative. Because I think I went through a long period where I thought being negative was cool. And so if I was going to give myself any advice, it would have been to bypass that and to just go straight to being a nice guy, which took me a while. I'm still trying to be a nice guy. You know, it took me a while to evolve into that. So.
As we wrap up, is there anything that we miss? Is there anything else that you just have to share with the listeners?
I'd say that there's absolutely probably several things that we missed, but we're coming up on 3 hours here, so we'll just have to save it for another time.
Perfect.
And, thanks so much for having me, Joel. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your interest. And
you're very welcome. Where can our listeners find you online if they want to check out more Blue Rodeo stuff? If they maybe want to reach out to you and say, hey, I love the interview or any of that stuff, where do they find you online on social media?
I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Glenn Milchem, GLENN MILCHEM. All of the Swallows records, there's 4 Swallows recordings, Turning Blue, Turning Blue, The Beauty of Our Surroundings, Awkward Situation, and Demystified. Those are the 4 Swallows records. They're all available on all the streaming platforms. My last solo recording, Glenn Milchem, Fates Conspire, the solo acoustic record, that's available on all streaming platforms. Blue Rodeo is available all over the place. If you can't find Blue Rodeo, I don't know what's going on with you. And then, all the numerous other bands I've mentioned. Not some of the earlier bands I mentioned. You won't be able to find either stuff online, but most of the later bands that I've talked about, you'll be able to find their stuff online or on YouTube. Yeah.
Perfect. So, all right. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for your lifelong pursuit of mastery as a drummer. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for dreaming big and having the courage to pursue that dream and see it through to fruition, to all the success that you've had. I want to thank you for all the amazing music that you've put out there through the different bands you've been a part of. This is amazing music that makes the world a better place in its own right. And the last thing I want to thank you for is sitting down with me as a big Blue Rodeo fan, being able to ask 2 to 3 hours worth of questions that I've always wanted to know the answer to means a lot. So Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joel. I really appreciate it.
All right, guys, to the Blue Rodeo fans, the Glenn's fans, to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'd love to hear from you guys. My goal is to grow this podcast organically, where you're giving me feedback on topics you'd like me to cover and guests you'd like me to interview. You can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel, and on Twitter at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.